Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Let me tell you about my grandpa, Old Man Stoner. He had more money than he knew what to do with an inheritance passed down through generations. Every time I heard about one of his new projects, I'd just shake my head and try not to sigh too loud. He had a heart of gold, no doubt. But in his later years, let's just say he was a few bricks shy of a load. Not much in the way of common sense. Thankfully, his investment and trust team kept things running smoothly, taxes paid, bills handled. But he still had full control over his own fortune and, God help us, he wasn't shy about spending it. Take the old, overgrown farm he bought in Wisconsin. He donated it to the Scouts, which was great, but decided to split it between the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. Come holiday campout season, that turned into a logistical nightmare. Be Prepared didn't quite cover that mess. Or the plot of land he bought in London, Ontario, turned it into a lovely water sculpture and picnic park. He donated that too. Trouble was, no one in the city wanted to maintain it. One good freeze turned it into a hazard, and that was the end of that. Another brilliant plan sunk. Most of his ideas started off looking amazing. But the closer you got, the more you realized they were built on half-baked plans and overgrown optimism. Now, I'm telling you all this to set the stage for what Uncle Eugene got me. By the time I hit my 40s, I'd managed to squirrel away over $1 million through frugal living, day trading, and plain hard work. I was ready to retire. I told Uncle Eugene over dinner at a nice spot downtown. Eugene, I think I'm ready to pull the trigger. I'm not a machinist anymore, just a manager of machinists. And I hate paperwork. What are you going to do, Curtis? You can't just stop living and sit on a shelf. I've got a plan, I said. I'm going to buy a big boat, maybe 50 feet long, and live on it. That way I can go where I want, when I want. He nodded. Makes sense. With your skills, you could handle the upkeep. You going for diesel? Yup, I said. Give me 2 days with the manual, and I can rebuild it. I'll need to carry spare parts, but a steel hull won't give me the problems of fiberglass, or would one might. He gave a quiet, knowing nod, like he'd made a decision. I'll keep an eye out for you. 3 weeks later, I'd finished all the retirement prep, health insurance, portfolio adjustment, liquid cash. I'd even found a promising steel-hulled tugboat yacht, 42 feet, dark cherry interior, solid build, fully wired for modern equipment. At $350,000, I thought it was a bargain, and I was negotiating with the owner. Then came the car horn, blaring outside my house on a Saturday morning. It was Uncle Eugene, grinning ear to ear. That grin never meant anything good. You're smiling, I said. That usually means someone's about to get in trouble. Lad, you wound me. He said. I've done you a grand favor. He drove us to Port Dover on Lake Erie. There, docked at the quay, was a 40-foot gray trawler. Looked brand new. What is this? It's yours. He beamed. Brand new and ready to go. I thanked him. What else could I do? Then I asked if he'd had it surveyed. Nope, he said. The broker said it was perfect. Uncle, I sighed. I think we'd better take a closer look. Let's take the cook's tour, shall we? I started at the wheelhouse. There's no radio. This vessel isn't even legal to take out on the water. I stuck my head out the door and looked up. No navigation lights either. Pulling my head back in, I noticed the windows, or rather, the lack of proper glass. The panes were only a 1/4 inch thick. A strong sea could shatter them easily. No radar, no GPS, just a compass. The breaker panel was minimal. Where were the battery gauges? The charging display? The inverter? The galley had the smallest refrigerator I'd ever seen outside a dorm room, and almost no storage. Those big square windows still just thin glass. This wasn't a real vessel. It was someone's rough sketch of one. A dock queen. We went below. The head had no separate shower. You had to sit on the toilet and use a handheld sprayer. That was grim and nearly impossible to keep clean. Amidships below deck, there were no fuel filters, only one oil filter. All the tanks were plastic. No generator, no battery bank, no inverter, no charger. Then I looked around. No bilge pumps at all. I frantically took notes as I uncovered each flaw. Some were blatant cost-cutting. Others were dangerous and likely negligent. Some outright illegal and actionable. This called for a lawyer, and fast. Uncle, you've been completely taken for a ride. This is a raw deal, one that should make your skin crawl. He sat down with a thump and laughed. Then he roared. Goddamn, I'm gonna buy his company just to fire his butt. I did my best to calm him down. Tell you what, let's get a good shark of a lawyer involved. Let's make shit flow uphill. Just suing the agent won't do much. We have to go after the a-holes that built this piece of shit. The return from the negligence suit should keep both of us in spending money for a couple years and skin the bejesus out of the builder. We had to get our ducks in a row. First, we needed evidence. Let's get out of here. We need to have a licensed surveyor document all this, then have a Coast Guard inspection done. Then we'll have a case. You got any pet sharks on retainer? Oh boy, do I. Good. Let's get the ball rolling. First, let's go find the local port authority and have this vessel put under guard to sequester the evidence. Then we'll take his advice as to finding a bonded, insured surveyor. The port master looked like a very angry bear by the time I finished listing the defects I'd found during a quick pass-through. We had guards on the ship and a surveyor poking and prying about by noon. By 3 we were sitting down with the surveyor and the port master. The surveyor looked grim. By selling this thing as seaworthy and ready to sail, someone is guilty of homicidal negligence. The port master spoke up. That's it. That's all I need to hear, Henry, but I'll need your write-up for the provincial prosecuting attorney. I'm making a few phone calls. I can assure you that several people shall be spending at least overnight courtesy of the local constabulary. I looked over at my uncle, snapped my fingers and said, and that's how you skin that cat. Everything was spinning down to a dull roar. It was 2 months down the road from our little discovery. Uncle Lee was going to get his money back, times 3. He was kind of pissed off because it meant he had more money to get rid of. I had just paid for my new ship and had signed the paperwork, received the keys and the ship's title. I'd gotten her insured and had paid for 6 months' lease on the slip while I got everything together. I'd had the name of the vessel changed from a numeric builder's code to fancy that. I was in the process of dumping the contents of my house and getting it ready for sale. We were at the dinner club in London again and had just finished a wonderful meal. Uncle Eugene was looking at me strangely. He suddenly exhaled, reached into his jacket for a checkbook, scribbled a bit, tore it off and sailed said instrument across the table at me. There. You obviously know much more about this field than I do. I'd like to see what ship you eventually purchase. I picked up the check and looked at it. I blinked and looked at it again. Yup, it was for $1.5 million. My eyebrows searched for my hairline. You sure about this? I squeaked out. He smiled like a self-satisfied cat and nodded his head. I cleared my throat to get my voice back down into a civilized register. I've already purchased a ship that I've fallen quite in love with. As soon as I hit the bank tomorrow, I waved the check in the air. Let's take a plane to Oakville. It's a lakeside suburb of Ontario. I'll show off my new baby. We agreed on a departure time and parted. As soon as I got home, I called the local airport to reserve an air taxi at about 9 to get to the Toronto airport. I had a briefcase in one hand and a stuffed canvas grocery bag in the other. I met Uncle Eugene in the departure lounge. Then we were carted off to the private departure area. Within a half hour, we were touching down in Toronto. A taxi got us to the harbor. We stopped at the head of the slip to admire the crisp lines of the bright cream yellow and dark green tugboat-style yacht. Well, come aboard then. We crossed the gangplank and I unlocked the door into the pilot house. He remarked, all this wood is beautiful. It's like being on the inside of a giant jewelry chest. I smiled. All that would meant more than a little care with lemon oil once a week. He looked over all the gauges and instrumentation. Quite a difference. Yes. Regrettably, it was all purchased and installed piecemeal. Nothing is integrated. It'll all come out and be replaced with an integrated package by Furno that combines radar, charting, ship locator information, GPS, a depth finder, and an autopilot. It's about a $20,000 package installed, but that includes a 150-watt radio telephone. I'll add a couple more specialized radios after that, and maybe a satellite phone if I get ambitious. Did you know that Sirius operates a contract weather service for ships, just like Sirius Radio? Eugene shook his head. It's amazing how far the state of the art has changed in 60 years or so. We shot the sun at noon and used a rope to check our speed, just as it had been done at the time of Christopher Columbus. And that was in 1958. There was nothing electrical but a flashlight aboard a 36-foot sailboat. We cooked over a 1-burner alcohol stove. We walked down to the galley. It was well laid out and had a gimbaled 3-burner propane gas stove with an oven. Nice. A granite countertop was illuminated by lights mounted under the overhead cabinet. A 4-foot granite-topped island jutted out from 6 inches below the kitchen's countertop. It serviced a bench seat on the starboard wall. This bench seat and counter sticking out are going away. In their place, I'm putting in a chest freezer. To make it look nice, I'll have a carpenter cover it with a wood sheathing similar to what we see here. I looked around the salon. It's lacking in shelves for books. I do like my books. I put down my briefcase and opened up the shopping bag. Within were a roll of toilet paper, just in case, a dispensing air freshener, a pack of batteries, and a can of citrus aerosol air freshener designed for the dispenser. I assembled everything and set it out on the counter, where it would spritz a bit of citrus stink around every 6 minutes or so. At the bottom of the bag were a roll of paper towels, a spray bottle of 409 cleaner, an old t-shirt of mine, and a new bottle of lemon oil. I put the cleaning supplies away in a lower cabinet. I took a towel, toothbrush, shampoo, toothpaste from my briefcase, and the toilet paper in hand. Let's go find the bog, shall we? A passageway next to the helm led to a set of stairs down to the bunks. On the center line of the ship lay a short passageway with 2 doors off the starboard side, an alcove holding a tool chest to the port side, and 1 door at the end. The first door was the head, where I left off my supplies. The next door hid the shower. The door at the end was watertight and led to the engine compartment. It was quite a busy little room, yet I could see where a space was reserved for a generac. Motor generator, the exhaust, water lines, and the power lines for it. I'd figure out how to shoehorn in a little water maker. I spotted a 30-gallon gas water heater. I pointed out that all the tanks were made of stainless steel. There was a long, narrow space next to the hull that accessed the air under the steps up to the wheelhouse. You had to watch your head in there as the height was only 5'6". On the way back up, Eugene noted, "This takes me back. This is just like we had on the Sparrow V berths. But these are roomier." I laughed. "Enjoy the view while you can. I'm taking apart the port side berth for engine room stores and large tools. I'll be putting in shelves and cabinet doors and plan to put a small generator in there too. I've still got to figure out where to put the washer and dryer." My uncle scratched his head and said laconically, "Why not put the freezer on the aft deck and use that corner for your washer and dryer? Repurpose that countertop. That way you'll have a nice counter to fold clothes on as well." I looked over at him. "I always knew you were smarter than you let on. I thought that your thing with the scouts was brilliant." He gently smiled. "I must admit that one came off much better than I expected." I had a thought. "Do you have a passport?" "Why, yes. I've had one for ages." "Why? The two of us get along pretty well. How would you like to take a trip down to the British Virgin Islands over the winter? I've got a few months of classes to take to get my captain's papers, secure my own passport, and get my house sold. I'd like to have a few things worked on here aboard ship as well before we depart. How about it?" Where would I bunk?" I blinked and smiled. We were back in the salon. "See that bench seat over there? Looks like a good candidate to be converted to a first mate's box bed, don't you think? It has all the privacy of a glass house, but I'm no shrinking violet. Deal, but only if I get to pay for the changes. I've got too damned much money as it is. By the way, how much did you spend on this thing? This will frost your butt. 350,000 flat. Good Christ, they did see me coming, didn't they? Afraid so, afraid so." That's when the contractors went to town. The port bunk below was refitted into drawers and cabinets. A small water maker and a genset were fitted into the engine room. The water maker was modular and was secured to the bulkhead. A Furano navigation and control stack was installed in the wheelhouse, built around a Furano 1934C NT plotter chart display. It had integrated AIS, Sirius satellite weather display, and an autopilot. The CMAP NT Max chart modules were amazingly expensive, but they certainly helped out when we came into a strange port, which was everywhere we planned to go. I took my courses and eventually got my captaincy papers. When I returned, I found the mate's bunk was built out with a tapered foot so you could get up the steps to the helm. The washer and dryer were installed and covered in wood paneling, and a 12 cubic foot 110-volt propane chest freezer was installed and bolted down on the aft deck up close to the salon. The washer and dryer had the stone-topped counter moved to cover them, to extend the counter space. I thought that was a nice trade-off. It gave more open space to the salon. There had been a second head in a small enclosure at the starboard stern corner of the salon. I had that torn out and turned into a storage locker. I couldn't help but notice the 6-seater motor launch that sat atop the salon roof where the crane could latch onto it and lower it to the water, or the reverse. At the same level yet closer to the mast and wheelhouse was a new block of something mechanical. I investigated to find a heat pump. It vented down into the salon and would either heat or cool as desired. It would also dehumidify damp cabin air, a definite plus. I'd have to install a few 12-volt fans to move the treated air around the ship, including below decks. The propane stores had been moved to a new locker between the centerline door at the stern of the salon and the port side passageway. It was ventilated and more than quadrupled our propane storage. We went to 4 50-pound cylinders chained up on 2 levels so that the locker remained shallow. When I signed for the ship, it had 2 20-pound reservoirs. I got hold of Cisco, a big ship's chandler and restaurant supply house out of the States, to kit out our galley with top-of-the-line grub as well as china, linens, emergency survival brownies, and cleaning supplies. A lot of little stuff came aboard that had been in storage from the closing of my house. I made another walkthrough with the contractor to site bookshelves. I was looking for 12 running feet of shelving. I also had the galley overhead lighting replaced by high-efficiency LED clusters that worked off of the 12-volt system. I'd been warned during my classes to take aboard a respectable set of firearms. I stayed true blue to the family name. Uncle Eugene had samples of everything the Stoner Company factories churned out. I picked up an State Route 25 sniper rifle with a low-light scope, an M18 with a 40mm grenade launcher, 2 Smith & Wesson .357 revolvers, and 2 Remington 12-gauge marine shotguns in stainless steel. The bench seat in the wheelhouse was worked on until the seat would lift to reveal a cache suitable for long arms and ammunition, along with the spare light bulbs and the windshield wiper arm replacements that would be available quickly on the bridge when they were needed. The bulk of our ammunition went into a cabinet beneath the engine room spares. I bought 3 very comfortable stools with wraparound arms and well-padded seats. They quite resembled captain's chairs with stool bottoms and ball-bearing swivel plates. 2 went into the dinette area, and 1 became the wheelhouse chair. The new larder, a rough cube taking up the starboard stern corner of the ship, was laid in there as a food locker. It was the size of a small portisan. Just forward of that lay the entertainment stack. It occupied a rather large cabinet. It already held a Pioneer stereo. I replaced that with a 100-disc CD player and a tuner amp, both by Sony. I bought a Samsung 32 HD television monitor display unit, which I mounted above the AV cabinet. There was just enough room left in the salon for 2 comfortable Adirondack chairs that normally occupied space on the stern deck, but could be pulled inside for watching movies and relaxing. It was a bit cramped when it was all indoors, but we expected that. The rest of the space in that cabinet I filled with a rack of DVD movies and a decent DVD player. I was ready to go. I tried to get hold of Eugene, but no joy. I took a cab to his place in Kitchener and rang the bell. No answer. I peered through the window and caught sight of him in his recliner. I beat and pounded on the window with no result. I called emergency services and reported that my uncle was unresponsive and requested aid. An ambulance and police car soon arrived. They had to call for a locksmith to pick the lock. Uncle Eugene was stone cold dead. I was shattered. The one goddamned person in our family that I cared about, much less could stand to be near, had clocked out. I took a cab back to the ship. I locked the door behind me. When my cell phone rang, I opened a hatch and heaved the damned thing over the side. It was a rough night. I thought about Uncle Eugene, what kind of man he was, his reputation, and what he believed in. I realized that he'd want me to pick myself up and go on this trip, if for no other reason than to enjoy myself and remember him in better times. In the morning, I used a pay phone at the head of the pier to summon a cab. I had a stop at a liquor store where I picked up 2 cases of the distiller's art in rum and bourbon. Then it was off to a grocery store for a few things, and a kiosk where I purchased 3 dead stupid disposophones at $40 per and 3 cards worth 100 minutes each. Back at the ship, I hauled out my laptop and surveyed my checklists. Everything checked out. All I had to do was disconnect from shore power and water, coil my lines, and head over to the service dock to get my tanks cleaned and take on a load of diesel. It was sunset. It seemed appropriate. I followed the chart display, keeping to the shipping channel as I motored up the Street Lawrence Seaway. I lined up in the queue to traverse the locks. Near 3 in the morning, I tied up at Montreal Old Port. When I awoke, it was nearly 9. I had a quick shower and called for a cab. My instruction was to take me to a large mall. The way he drove, I suspected that I should have specified a mall in the same province. Eventually, we arrived. After paying his scandalous fees, I looked for a Helly Hansen outlet. Yes, they do have outlet stores. There I bought waterproofs and a safety suit. I paid for them to be delivered the next morning to the dock, when I would be there to accept delivery. By then the bistros were open. I stopped at a likely spot and had breakfast. I supposed that I should have a suit. I entered a haberdashery and requested the assistance of a tailor. I ended up with a good black wool suit, 6 heavy linen shirts, and 4 pair of wool whipcord pants. Next I found a sporting goods store where I found a goose-down jacket with a waterproof shell. That, some good gloves, a good hat, a neoprene face mask, and 2 pair of goggles later, I felt that I had the winter clothing covered. Had a few short-sleeved shirts that I liked, and added a couple pair of synthetic, fast-drying Bermuda shorts. I left for a bit of lunch. A large bookstore served me well with some reading material and several movies that either I hadn't seen or wished to see again. When confronted with the bookstore's medical section, I realized that I had been negligent. I didn't have so much as a Band-Aid aboard, other than the field expedient paper toweling and electrical tape. I took the first cab in the line and requested a stop at a medical supply house. I always carried that damned briefcase, as it had my passport and bona fides within. Once we reached my destination, I explained to the young man behind the counter that I was the captain of a brand spanking new blue water ship and needed kitting out with a first responder bag, coagulant bandages, inflatable casts, fire rescue blankets, and a portable oxygen cart. He suggested a few more things as well, such as a fingertip pulse oximeter, a contact thermometer, a surgical stapler, a few quarts of butadiene solution, dry ampoules of penicillin, disposable syringes, 24 yard square triangle bandages, a fat bag of roller bandages, a backboard, a urine collection flask and a bedpan, hair nets, scrubs, masks, and gloves. I took the salesman's suggestion and added an automated blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope. They had some rubber sheets, and I picked a few of them as well. Eugene's birth was going to be my medical birth. A good light was needed as well. I'd have to investigate that, as well as how to mount it. I planned to store most of that stuff in plastic tubs beneath the berth, covered in stretch wrap. I planned to paint all that storage space in thick, white enamel before the stores went in. Next came a trip to a military surplus store. I bought 4 surplus French litters, several good wool blankets, a case of combat rations, 2 dozen combat pressure bandages, and a few knives that struck my fancy. He had a third-generation low-light monocle behind the counter that was designed for use with a helmet. I bought both the helmet and the monocle. The spare batteries weren't cheap, but I bought them as well. He had some green-colored goggles for use in combat, where laser rangefinders were in use. I bought a pair. I had an idea. I asked the proprietor if there was a trustworthy gunsmith anywhere close. He shrugged and gave me a phone number that was written down beside the cash register. The litters were stored in the engine room beneath the stairs. I hung the helmet and monocle next to my berth. Once back at my ship, I called the number I was given. I explained that I wanted targeting lasers for a large frame revolvers and marine shotguns installed. I preferred units that required 123A batteries rather than wafer-style batteries. They held more milliamp hours and were much more readily available. I offered him an extra $100 to come to me so that I didn't have to risk moving about town with firearms. He promised to come the next day. I had to stay in town for 3 days anyway while my tailoring was finished. I searched long and hard for a powerful cold tube short UV lamp. I found one that ran off of 110-volt mains. Wearing a long-sleeved shirt and rubber gloves, I took a hint from the last time I'd been in an emergency room. I staged plastic pans with various kits for wound debridement, bandaging, intubation, suturing, and stapling. I placed all these kits in the pans and turned on the UV, then turned over everything in the sterilizing light. After 7 minutes or so, I turned off the light, removed my goggles, and covered everything with cling film, then gave it another blast of UV to make sure the cling film was clean. I labeled the ends with a magic marker and stashed them away. I used cooking parchment paper in between the pans so that the cling film wouldn't stick. Once I stored all my medical supplies, I did a trial run, so to speak, and attempted to stage a surgical emergency. I had no way to keep my instruments or bandages at hand. Also, I was either on my knees or cramped up bending over the subject. I needed a rolling stool, a swing arm lamp, and an instrument cart. Now, where the hell could I store the things? There was a slot remaining between the aft bulkhead and the side of the washer-dryer setup. It was about 32 inches wide. This was as good a use for it as anything. I found an instrument tray that looked like a hospital mess table and a rolling stool that would fit beneath it. I had hooks in my spares kit that I could screw into the ceiling above the berth to support broken limbs if necessary. I spent the rest of the day reading. For dinner, I pulled out an IQF lasagna serving and nuked it. I cleaned up and went to bed. That morning, I took delivery of my heavy weather gear. Until I figured out where to stow it. It lived on the bench in the wheelhouse. I pulled out one of my older towels, spread it out on the breakfast bar, then brought out my shotguns and pistols. After ensuring that they were unloaded, I sat back and read, waiting for the gunsmith. He showed up about an hour before noon. He made short work out of installing the lasers and demonstrated how to operate them, as well as how to load fresh batteries. I was quite happy with his work and gave him an extra $50 for his trouble. I called my investment and trust people. I let them know that I was going to be out of touch for a while, perhaps as long as 6 months. I reminded them that they had a limited power of attorney in my name, and admonished them that anything done would be reviewed by a third-party agent. I arranged for my mail to be redirected to them and hung up. I reviewed my book collection with an eye towards cooking and baking. I found my selection to be unacceptable. I summoned a taxi to take me to a large bookstore. Once there, I found the cookbooks I was after, as well as a book on emergency surgery. Wandering around, I picked up a PDR on CD, Physician's Desk Reference A Narcotic Compendium, and the biggest Grey's Anatomy that I'd ever seen. It was an oversized coffee table book. I found a few more movies and a few more albums. I asked about the availability of encyclopedia in electronic form. I was suggested to purchase a small dedicated computer and load the downloadable form of Wikipedia on it. It sounded like a winner to me. My next stop was a computer store. I bought an HP laptop and had a 256 gigabytes SSD, solid-state hard drive, installed. I paid the guy $250 under the counter to put an OS on the thing and load Wikipedia on it. I came back the next morning to pick it up. He looked like he hadn't gotten much sleep, but he was happy as hell to get my money. I was happy to get the loaded laptop. I downloaded the biggest dictionary that I could find and the biggest available thesaurus onto it as well. Let's face it, we all get brain lock while writing once in a while, and the only way to power through it is with the kick in the pants a good thesaurus can give you. I gritted my teeth and bought a mixer. I laid out the pros and cons, then bit the bullet. Finding a storage space for that big scumsucker sure hurt, though. When all was said and done, I ended up storing it on top of the clothes washer in the corner. I used it 2 or 3 times a week, so after a while I stopped fretting. While waiting for my suits to be delivered, I had bought 2 on general purposes. Dry cleaners could be few and far between where I was headed. I pulled out the manuals for my engine and my Generac. The Generac was a simple little diesel that you would be hard-pressed to kill without a bullet. The main engine, however, was a mess. It wasn't designed to run at sea, and a lot of trade-offs had been made that I found obvious. At least to me. I much preferred the Caterpillar engines, having worked with them before. I made a few phone calls. I was told to moor at the Silver Street Wharf in Portland. I was to call a number when I was tied up, and I'd be met. I contracted to have a marine Caterpillar diesel installed, which was much more dependable than the piece of crap I was running at the time. I packed a sea bag and headed for a hotel. I didn't need to put up with the bullshit that went with an engine refit. First, though, I screwed a hasp to the weapons locker next to the wall where it was inconspicuous and put a padlock on it. 4 days later, I returned to my ship. I found a wood crate on my stern deck. A heavy wood crate. It held the spares kit for my new engine. I was happy to trade out the old spares for the new. No surprises. I did some in-house maintenance, such as wiping down all the woodwork with lemon oil before I shipped out. I made my way down the coast. When the diesel tanks got low, I filled up and kept motoring on. The replacement engine was a Model 3056. My power curve changed quite a bit. I had doubled my horsepower, doubled my cruising RPM, and gone from 6.8 to 8.4 gallons per hour of diesel consumed at cruise. I had 520 gallons capacity for diesel, so that defined my cruising range. I'd gone from 9 to 15 knots cruising speed. 62 hours cruising time, scraping it down to the bone bad idea, at 15 knots. That gave me about 930 nautical miles range, neglecting real-world conditions such as weather and currents, without the use of an auxiliary fuel bladder on deck. I soon found myself at Nassau Customs. I didn't bother trying to justify my presence. After a quick inspection of my ship and papers, I was released back into the unsuspecting crowd. Nah, I wasn't really belligerent, I was just tired and not in the mood to deal with any nonsense. I headed straight to the Nassau Yacht Club. The next morning, I was sitting in a bosun's chair, hanging over the side with a can of paste wax in my pouch and a random orbital sander on an extension cord tethered to my chair. I was slowly working over the hull, stopping about 4 feet from the waterline. The rest I planned to cover from my dinghy. Then I heard a shout. "Hey, mister." I looked over. It was a teenager waving. She seemed eager for conversation. I had a simple way of breaking the ice. "Hey, kid. What's up?" She visibly relaxed. Good. She wasn't offended, not much anyway. It's been a slow season. The regatta folks are gone, and the snowbirds haven't shown up yet. I stretched my back muscles slowly. I'd been at it since dawn. "How's the fishing around here?" "I've never really tried it." She got excited again. "Really? Oh man, it's a blast. Bonefish fight like hell, but by law you've got to take them while waiting on the flats. There's big areas on the south side of the island set aside for that. Deep sea fishing around here, you never know what you'll catch. Tell you what, give me a few more days to finish this job, and you can help me buy into some tackle. Then, if your folks agree, we'll go out and see what we can catch." Brutal. She turned to run off. "Hey, I need to meet your parents. Everything hinges on that. Understand?" She nodded like a mad thing. I guess that she at least thought that she had her folks under her thumb. Sigh. I kept waxing and buffing. I finished one side by 3 that evening. I'd worn out 4 sheep's wool pads. I was wiped out. The next morning I set aside some time to make some fresh bread. I wasn't out there to finish a goddamned race. I was there to savor each day. I didn't intend to wring every essential bit of enjoyment out of each and every day, either. It was a matter of acceptance and appreciation. Fresh bread, sweet butter, and hot tea. Had a good book. What more could you really ask for? I had about another hour's work on the starboard side of the hull when I heard "Hello" the ship. Hell, I was almost done. Oh well. I handed myself up to the deck, put on a shirt, and called down. "Ahoy the dock. Come aboard if you're friendly." A man and woman dressed in, God help me, tennis whites, came up the gangplank. The man shook my hand, but the woman looked at me with scorn. She said, "So this is the old fart that wants to bonk my little Emma?" What reflexively came out of my mouth was incredibly rude. "Bitch, I said come aboard if you're friendly, not decorative." The man laughed and laughed. He couldn't help nor control himself. She looked at him as if he were dead meat. Rotting dead meat. I observed, "You may wish to sleep here tonight to avoid a dagger between the ribs before morning. She looks capable of it." He smiled at me in honest appreciation. "I have no fear for my daughter's honor in your presence. You have my permission to take her fishing." He turned to his wife. "As for you, I can't take you anywhere. Shut up and let's go home." She winced and turned away. I had to say something. "Please don't worry about your daughter. I don't assault children." I could see something in her eyes. She almost smiled as she turned away and descended down the gangway. She doesn't socialize well, does she? No, not especially well. Sorry. I held up a hand. Don't apologize. Something caused it. We simply must cope with the fallout. He sighed. Soon we parted. I finished the starboard side that day. The next day I polished the cabin and micro-waxed the windows. The next day, I used my small boat to wax and polish the hull down to the waterline. I was finished by noon. I went out to buy spares to be able to repeat my wax job. Emma showed up at about 8:30. She was dressed in light green baggy shorts that went almost to her knees and what appeared to be a yellow silk sleeveless blouse. She wore what looked like a bikini top beneath it. For her, it was modest dress, and I was thankful for that. I got my morning dose of hug, after which our summoned taxi arrived. My ship didn't have a fighting chair or anything like that. I had the yacht club arrange for a reinforcing double steel sheet over a part of the stern deck, drilled out for carriage bolts. The bolts went in threads up to secure a column-mounted chair. Once the chair was mounted to the sheet, then the whole thing was secured to the deck with copious amounts of construction adhesive so that no water would be trapped between two layers to cause later havoc. My stern deck was getting pretty cluttered. I sort of donated one of my Adirondack chairs to the club by toting down to the end of the dock and leaving it there. It would make a nice fishing chair for any kids or land-based fishermen. We picked up a fighting cup. It straps around your hips and gives you a place to keep the rod, but other than atop your genitals. Then came two long-handled 10-foot rods, each with a huge reel loaded with 50-pound test and a good selection of weights, hooks, and wire leaders. I thought that a bait bucket was mandatory as well as a long gaff hook. Yes, I didn't need a license. I already had a hose and a nozzle aboard ship to clean off the deck. I thought that it would be a good idea to pick up a lightweight pair of long pants and a long-sleeved fishing shirt that would protect me from the sun. I picked up a similar shirt for Emma as well. Adding a tube of high SPF sunblock and a small tackle box to keep everything organized meant we were good to go. We had to hang the rods and the gaff hook out the window of the taxi on the way back to the ship. I wondered where the hell I'd store the rods. A pair of 10-foot rods with a 2-foot handles made for a cumbersome package. Then add a pair of big, bulky reels. I ended keeping everything in the dinghy since it had a cover. Before we went fishing, I went down to my tool crib. I dug out a 1-inch brass punch that was a foot long. I carefully drilled a 1/4-inch hole through it, an inch into the knurled end. Diamond cross-hatching to keep the thing from slipping in your grip when covered in oil. I ran a cord through that and knotted it so that I could wrap it around my wrist. I didn't want to have some toothy scumsucker thrashing about my stern deck without some way of taking him out of the game. The yacht club had both cut fish and live 6-inch minnows for bait. I elected to stay with cut fish as it was already dead and less trouble to maintain. I was told that the fish rose in the evenings and early mornings to feed. We went out that evening. I used the fish finder integrated into the depth finder. The bottom was pretty uniform. I found a few odd features, but no crevices leading to deep water. We dunked some fish, but didn't catch much. We had just dumped our bait in preparation to close up for the night when Emma had her line sing out. She yelped and got into the chair, then started closing the drag. It was full dark before she pulled a hefty permit up to the side. I got it with the gaff and pulled it over the side. It was 20, maybe 22 inches long. It looks like you just caught dinner for your family. I gutted it and stuffed it into a garbage bag with about 5 pounds of ice. Once back at the dock, she called for her dad to come pick her up as the fish made an ungainly package to carry. Her dad seemed pleased that her day had gone so well. I hosed off the rear deck the next morning and gave everything a good scrubbing. I thought that I'd spent enough time there and didn't want to give Emma enough time to crush on me. I quietly settled my affairs, had my black water tank pumped and flushed and the diesel tanks topped off. Bright and early I was off for Jamaica. It was an easy haul. I had no problems. My NAV age sure took the guesswork out of the equation. I docked at the Jamaica Customs dock in Kingston and arranged for a tourist visa. Several slips were available. I was intrigued by the Errol Flynn Yacht Club. It was secure, professional, and expensive. I wanted to explore the island. I was also tired of paying for taxis. I arranged to have a Vespa with a front rack and a grab bar in the back shipped over from the States as air cargo. My hoist would easily handle it, and a strap hoist was a lead pipe cinch to clip around the steering post and to the rear grab bar. It was one more damn thing to clutter up the stern deck, but who cared? I got it insured, and as a Canadian, I got an international license for it. Within days, I was tootling around the island. I wasn't stupid, though. I chained it up wherever I went. I was standing around waiting for my turn to order a lobster po' boy at a food stand when a big black guy tapped my shoulder. "I seen you down at the yacht club. I help there sometimes." You help a fellow out?" He didn't look like he wanted me beat up or dead. What the hell? I try to never let people down. It's what I do. He grinned big enough to show his teeth. "I'm a fisherman when I got the fuel. The trouble is my motor, she won't start." "Diesel?" Yep, I bet I can help. I gotta go back to the ship for a couple things though. We gotta pull your injectors. You got a hot plate? Yeah, but what's that gotta do with anything? Tar, man. Diesel turns to tar. The climate here is hot and damp. That's the worst for it. We gotta cook the injectors in gasoline, then poke the holes clean. They're tiny, tiny little holes, but people make wires for this, and I've got some. Like I said, not much can kill a diesel engine if it's not supercharged. They're really pretty simple. I got my probes, a pair of needle-nosed pliers and a socket set, then he took me down to his boat. He left to get an extension cord, a glass jar with a cap and a half-liter of gas. I worked to get his injectors out while he ran around. I wish that I'd thought to bring a handful of rags along. When he got back, we set the gas to gently heat. As each injector came out, I plunked it into the gas and recapped it. Occasionally, I'd give the jar a shake and a swirl. The gas was slowly getting darker, just a bit. That made me pretty confident that I was right. Diesel slowly turns to tar like gasoline deposits of varnish. All the shaking and rolling around in your tank turns that tar into little turds that get into the injector feed. Then they plug the injectors, and you're screwed. You ever heard of washing diesel or conditioning diesel? Yeah. A guy comes around the yacht club once in a while with a big cart with a pump and shit on it. He spends the day on just one ship. That's it. He pumps it over and over again through his filters to get all the shit out of the tanks. Cheap diesel turns faster, and warm diesel goes faster yet. You can do the same thing by pumping your tanks through several layers of old t-shirts, then pouring it back in. Check for shit in your fuel glass, where you trap water. You might see specks in there too. After about a half hour of near boiling temperature, I pulled the glass jar off the hot plate and turned it off. Once it cooled enough to touch, I popped the lid and pulled out the injectors one by one. I probed each nozzle, then swished the injectors in the gas again using my pliers. Soon we had a pile of clean injectors. The residual heat evaporated the gas. I'd capped the gas jar again to keep explosive vapors from building up in his engine compartment. There's a real good chance that your engine pulls fuel from the bottom of the tank. Let's put a glass jar under each injector feed line and crank the engine a few times. Hopefully, all the crap at the bottom will come out and leave you with the rest having better quality. This should work if your boat's been sitting for a week or so. That way nothing should have stirred it up and the crap should have settled to the bottom. Once he dug up some quart mason jars, we sacrificed about a gallon of fuel, then I put everything back together. He cranked it, and she turned right over. I told him to show the dirty fuel to his fuel dealer. We flushed his bilge with fresh water and pumped it out twice to get the fuel out of there. We shook hands, and I left a very happy fisherman. Between Jamaica and Cuba lies some hellaciously deep water. It's part of a trench cutting southeast-northwest. Near dawn one morning, I went trolling over that with some 6-inch chubs and the ship on autopilot. I started catching black grouper. Good God, I caught fish. I must have hit a sweet spot. I had over 300 pounds of fish by the time I was done. I gutted them all and packed them in garbage bags with ice and a little salt. I asked one of the guys at the marina where I should take it. He said that there was a public area across the point near the Point Royal Mall. People sometimes had barbecues and feeds there. I asked him to put out the word that we were going to grill fresh grouper today, LOTS, a fresh grouper. I gave a guy at the desk $100 to use his pickup truck. We got the fish on board, then headed for a big grocery that was only 2 blocks away from the park. I got soda, beer, bread, paper plates, paper towels, garbage bags, and charcoal. One guy called a rental place to get his grills and big tubs to hold the drinks and ice. We had a blowout fall Saturday. Pretty soon we had people coming out of the woodwork. The cops came by. I told them to grab some hot fish and a cold beer. They smiled and took me up on it. There wasn't much to sit on, but across the road and a half block down was a public toilet, so we were covered. By nightfall it was all over. All that was left was a pile of filled garbage bags, a bunch of full stomachs, and some good memories. Now that was a good time. The next month, November, towards the end of the month, we did it again. I caught 4 big yellowfin tuna and a mess of black grouper. The weather almost didn't cooperate. We got some sprinkles blown off the sea. That didn't stop the picnic though. I petitioned the parish council to let me put up a shelter there. I promised to fund it and donate it to the parish. They had no problem with it. I went a little overboard. The finished shelter was 80 feet long and 20 feet deep. It took up half the available property. I heard afterwards that they were delighted. Any place that they could establish an open-air market meant more tourist dollars. The close location to a public sanitary was just icing on the cake. I thought that the public bathrooms were the key to the whole thing. I got a phone call from my bank. It was quite short and cryptic. All it said was, "Check your balances." That worried me. If someone had scammed me out of my investments, then I was screwed. When I managed to get my laptop on an internet connection and audited my accounts, I almost pissed myself. I had over $713 million in my master account. I teared up. This was Uncle Eugene's legacy to me. I'd rather be out there on the sea with Uncle Eugene than have the money. I wouldn't even be seeing this if the government hadn't already taken its cut. I knew that inheritance taxes averaged 50%. No wonder why he fretted about spending his money. He'd had a capitalization of roughly $1.5 billion. Good God. I called my investment team and got them looking into long-term investment portfolios. I demanded that they stay away from areas with excessive political and religious dissent, oil companies, gas companies, anything to do with agricultural genetics, pharmaceutical companies, banks and insurance companies. Anything legally or morally controversial. There were many areas in our global economy that were houses of cards just waiting to come down, and come down hard. For example, I certainly didn't want to have any money invested in anything to do with fracking when the bills came due. All that money, like the proverbial dead agnostic, all dressed up and no place to go. I told myself that the only difference between 2 million and 700 million was the decimal place. I resolved to let nothing change for a while. For December, I wanted to do up the picnic a bit better. I advertised in the local paper that we were going to try to put on a 1,000-pound fish grill, bring your own chairs and tableware. I arranged with a local grocery store to reserve 50 loaves of bread, 20 pounds of butter, and 200 pounds of dressed, split open chickens for us. I paid them to set the birds marinating in garlic, oregano, honey, and corn oil. I made arrangements with the rental company to hire out their grills again along with the drink tubs and all the picnic tables they could lay their hands on. I made sure that 2,000 pounds of charcoal was available. I put down earnest money on it. We also had tomatoes, onions, and peppers for vegetable kebabs. I asked 3 other guys that were living at the marina to come out with me to catch fish. I piloted while the other guys traded off fishing, gaffing, and gutting. My ice maker got one hell of a workout. Once we got back, I found that someone had stapled visqueen around the shelter to keep the rain and wind off. Somebody showed up with a little Honda generator and a stereo. We had tunes. A group of housewives descended on us and the fish. They had gallons of potato salad, coleslaw, and tens of pounds of jerk seasoning. Hell, it was out of my hands. I sat back with a beer and enjoyed myself. I found myself in a euchre game after a while. We just played for points. I helped clean up when everything wound down. I pitted the trash collectors. They had one hell of a pile of garbage bags to pick up. Other than that, the place looked unused. Remarkable. In January, we had a pig roast. In February, it was goat. Come March, we did slow-smoked brisket and baked beans. In April, the shrimp were back. I bought 400 pounds of commercially caught langostinos, bloody huge shrimp, sometimes 3 to a pound. We must have gone through 50 or 60 pounds of melted butter. In May, I changed the deal. I provided the beer, bread, butter, grills, charcoal, drinks in ice tubs, plates, paper towels, trash bags, and garbage bags. I asked the local fishermen to step up and show what they could do. It was kind of a community pride thing. These guys knew how to fish. Of course they did. It was how they stayed alive. Each fisherman stood behind his table serving out his catch, from clams and wine, to seasoned boiled shrimp, to fried calamari, to various free-swimming fish. Some was fried, some was grilled, some was steamed like the shrimp. Nobody went away hungry, and you'd be hard put to find anyone that didn't have a good time. I heard that eventually they moved everything to a park halfway across the point where the monthly seafood feeds served over 2,000 people a day. They charged everyone a few bucks to get in, and everybody cooked. It became a point of pride as to who had the best grilled chicken, the best barbecue pork. The cruise ships started timing their calls to coincide with the feeds, and it went multi-day. They had to put in more toilet facilities. Some of the other parishes, notably the poorer ones, bitched about not being in on the action. The simple answer was, why not? Eventually, there were 4 parishes in on the action. They split their food specialties to avoid market saturation. That's not what they called it, but that's what it was. I pitched in to build the shelters and help get the bathrooms built. The parishes had to get paved parking arranged, electric and water facilities for the cooking stalls and the bathrooms. One parish turned it into a pirate thing, with rum and fruit drinks, conch and sweet potato to eat, and people dressed in pirate regalia. It was all great fun and brought in the tourist dollars. I thought that it was all like a distorted taste of Chicago with an island twist. The last thing I did in Jamaica before I left was to capitalize 4 fishermen's credit unions. It was how the lower middle class made their living other than by service industries like the tourism shtick. Sometimes a boat, net, or motor needed rebuilding. The credit bureaus made sure that the money was there to do it. I was sprawled out like a beaten prize fighter, still feeling the effects of too much rum from the night before. Sleeping on the stern deck, I woke to the sound of a big cat, something like a panther. Looking down the gangway, I saw a large spotted amber cat sitting there, staring at me. For some reason, I motioned for it to come aboard. It padded up the gangplank towards me, easily 25 pounds, or more, a big kitty. It came up and rested its chin on my knee. I figured it wanted to join the crew. Carefully, I reached out and scratched behind its ear. It let out a contented sound. For some reason, I got the idea that it wanted to stick around. Let's give you the grand tour. I pulled myself up from my Adirondack chair and waved toward the rear deck. This is the stern deck. Open territory. I moved inside the door. This is the salon. This is where I mostly live. I pointed to the galley. We cook here. Then I climbed the stairs to the wheelhouse. This is important. Don't mess with what's here. Down the stairs to below deck. I usually sleep here. I showed off the shower and the bathroom. Opening the engine room door, I warned, this is dangerous. Don't go in here. The cat scanned the room, then backed away. I closed the door. Leading the way back to the salon, I sat on my uncle's old berth and patted the mattress beside me. The cat jumped up and curled beside me, watching curiously. You'll need food, water, a place to sleep, and a spot to take care of business. Hopefully, I can teach you to go over the side. Feeling a full bladder, I went out to the stern deck and relieved myself over the side. The cat watched intently. Next thing I knew, the cat lifted a leg and did the same. Good job, I nodded. Now, we needed to figure out what you like to eat. I locked up the ship, lowered the Vespa to the dock, and detached the hooks. Crawling aboard, I fired it up. You coming? The cat jumped up on the rear seat and placed a paw on each of my shoulders, a big cat ready to go. I headed off to the grocery store. We were standing in front of several pallets of pet chow. Well, do any of these smell okay? He paced down the aisle, delicately sniffing each offering. He finished the aisle, then returned to one stack and put a paw on it. That was enough for me. I wrote down the name. Next, we need to find a litter box clay filler you can tolerate. We continued down the row. He sneezed at the bags of the stuff with scent crystals. So much for that. Nothing else seemed to pass muster. I shrugged and continued. I picked up a food and water dish that would have kept a Great Dane happy. While walking down the aisle, the cat took an abrupt left into the automotive supplies department. I found him sniffing a bag of oil dry. You really like that stuff? He growled and stuck his paw on it again. That was enough for me. We walked out of there with the small goods on a cart. We got it all back to the ship and put it into storage. The rest would be coming by common carrier, as the Vespa was too small. I looked him over. He was eyeing me. No doubt you're hungry. We can fix that. I pulled a 5-pound roast out of the freezer and gave it a quick 2-minute zap, just enough to break down the ice crystals. Once done, I laid it out onto his dish and filled the water dish next to it. Yup, he was hungry. Afterwards, he walked down the gangway and down the dock to shit in the weeds. When he came back, he climbed into my lap and proceeded to make himself at home. We had the bare bones of an agreement in place, but everything was good. I petted him for a bit, and we both fell asleep in the sunlight. I was awakened by my cell phone. I answered it to find out that my feed order had arrived. Hey, your food and litter came. Let's go get it. He sprang down. It took me a bit longer to get in gear. He paced me as we walked down the dock. At the main building, one of the desk managers greeted me. Then he saw the cat. Jesus, that cat's been haunting the club for a couple of weeks. Are you okay? Yup. It seems that I've been adopted. I reached down to scritch his ears. I got an appreciative growl, then he batted my hand away, as if to say not now. You've got a shipment for me? Yeah, about 200 pounds. I'll have a guy bring it down on a cart, okay? More than okay. It'll save my back. We strolled back to the ship. I set up his litter box close against the aft wall of the salon, where the extended storm roof would give it a little cover. When the stevedore came with our shipment, I carried the bags into the salon and put them standing up on the floor of the larder, next to the vacuum cleaner. I filled the litter box half full with clay pellets and put the rest away. His food dish got filled as well. I took out a big steak for each of us to thaw. I sat back down on my Adirondack chair. He climbed up to home in on my lap again. We gotta talk. I was working on his ears. You have to go to the vet to get your shots and make sure everything's okay. His ears flattened for a bit, then came back up. He knew what a vet was. If you tend to get too fat, I petted his belly. We'll have to cut back on your meat and fat. You won't get enough exercise on the ship to stay strong and lean. I took him into the local vet the next morning. Where the hell did you get a Savannah cat? From the size of his paws, he's still a juvenile. He's going to be a monster. I got adopted. I've got no complaints, and he seems to like where we're headed, so everything's cool. We decided to call him Rex. He got all his shots and a serialized tag to wear on his collar. I could see that he didn't like the idea of wearing a collar, but accepted it as the price for living with humans. He'd had a slight case of wire worms that the medications took care of. It was a good thing that they were caught early. They were debilitating and would penetrate all his organs over time. Once we were back at the ship, I told him sorry about the name. I'm sure that you call yourself something like Beautiful Spotted Amber Hunter, but Rex is all you're going to get. It means ruler or king. He blinked and ignored me. I grilled up our steaks and a couple of potatoes. I fixed his like I fixed mine, with sour cream and butter. He poked the steak with a paw before he ate it. I got the idea that he'd rather have it raw. He did like the dressed potato once it cooled, though. The next morning, I opened the rear hatch to be confronted with 3 dead rabbits and a self-satisfied cat. I pulled on a pair of rubber gloves and proceeded to skin and butcher the rabbits. One had worms in its heart. I showed him. This is how you got infected. I pitched that one over the side. The other 2 were fine. I gutted them and dusted them with a little salt. He chowed down. I washed down the deck and made my own breakfast French toast and blackberry jam. He wasn't interested after the first sniff. I sat at the counter typing away, adding to my journal. I had 7 stories in the mill that were waiting on my head to do something with them. I had 22 others published. I wasn't the best semantician, much less speller, but I had a moderate following. I felt somewhat confined in my research. I signed up for a satellite telephone with a data plan. The device I signed up for was an interesting little thing. It had an ISDN, Integrated Services Digital Network, jack that what looked like a standard business handset plugged into. It had a lot better acoustic properties than any cell phone that I'd ever had, as well as a phone book, call waiting, voicemail, and call filtering. I signed up for a 5 gig a month service plan. If I wanted to download more porn, I'd hook up to a digital line at a marina. I figured that it was about time to say goodbye to Port Antonio, even though it had been good to me. Hopefully I'd left the area with a legacy of a slightly better economy due to food tourism. I had the black water tank purged and steamed, the diesel tanks filled, and headed west for San Juan, Puerto Rico. I easily cleared customs, and the paperwork the vet provided me greased the gears for Rex to get the nod as well. Let me tell you, I wasn't a very damned happy camper. The facilities for shipborne visitors was dismal at best. If you weren't a giant party ship or commercial shipping, you got short-shafted. I settled on a place called Puerto Real on the southwest coast. We soon became a known sight, me driving my little, or not so little, Vespa with a big cat riding pillion behind me, his paws on my shoulders. The island was highly commercialized with airports, malls, and motels everywhere. What a waste. The prices were high as hell too. How did they afford to live? We cut short our visit and headed on. We motored on through the islands, not seeing much that seemed unique. Near the tail of the island chain, we came to Grenada. I called on the postmaster's frequency to obtain clearance to dock. I heard nothing. That was unusual. I motored into St. George's Inner Harbor and docked at one of the larger piers in Port Louis. Once docked and the engines were shut down, I stood on the after deck, listening. I heard nothing. Nothing. My radio telephone had no traffic whatsoever. I walked down the pier to the commercial office. I found the dried remains of the office personnel at their stations. All I could think of was a fast-acting plague occurred or a military biological agent had been released. I was still alive. From the appearance of the corpses, I should have been gasping my last breath on the ground by now. No, the agent, whatever it was, had neutralized. I had several courses of action available to me. I had to think. I gave myself a day to decide my course of action. If another party came upon the island, then my choices would be severely limited. Rex went hunting. I hoped that he would find live game. Who knew how much of the food chain the agent had destroyed? I made up my mind. I notified the Secretary of the United Nations that I was claiming the island of Grenada as an unpopulated land due to a catastrophic depopulation due to a radical disease vector. I gave my name, Canadian identification numbers, as well as the date and time. I left my satellite phone number in the message. Then I notified the French government that a catastrophe had befallen Grenada, and as the governor pro tem through the United Nations, I was requesting that the French Foreign Legion be called out to give aid and succor. I promised 100 million Canadian dollars towards the mission. I was promised aid and assistance within 24 hours. There was nothing else for it. I had kicked a wasp nest. Let's see who got stung. I certainly didn't want the greedy Americans to get a toehold on the island, especially after their disastrous attempt at post-colonial invasion politics during the 90s. I sat down with a tablet of paper to iterate my action items. The towns with no populace had to have their services shut down. Electrical production, water resources, and natural gas had to be conserved. Electrical generation facilities had to be located and inspected for maintenance tasks. And used water wells had to be capped to prevent aquifer pollution. A search had to be made for native populace. Their rights took precedence over my assumption of governance. I would abdicate to any native person found within the next 3 years. That would certainly give enough time to scan the island, given infrared sensors on helicopters. A measured number of colonists had to be allowed to immigrate so that farms could be tended. We needed to quickly become self-sufficient in food supplies. Any stock had to be cared for, despite the long period between the onset of the disease and my discovery. Fields had to be tended, farm equipment maintained, and farm buildings kept in good repair. Likewise, workers and engineers educated in the electric, oil, and gas industries had to be allowed into the country to preserve and maintain the energy infrastructure. Perhaps attempting to maintain such a large city was foolish. In that case, rays or zones should be leveled and the services that supplied them secured. That would give a moderate protection against runaway firestorms, as well as cut down on drains on the infrastructure and potential sources of diseases. All those dead bodies were still out there. The port had to be surveyed, and if any ship were in port, its principals had to be notified so that replacement crews could be dispatched. The airports had to be secured. If the runways were not broken up, then military teams with surface-to-air missiles had to be put in place to deny hostile takeovers from agencies and countries that were not above taking what they wanted, i.e. the United States. Any military resources had to be discovered, inventoried, and secured. There was no rail system in the country. Everything was done by ship, intermodal, semi, or air. We needed people, and not just ignorant pricks from some slum. We needed workers, managers, accountants, drivers, and other professionals. God knew where we would get them. Even though I had the money to fund most of the infrastructure immediately, that wouldn't work. We needed to build the lower levels of the supply chains before we implemented the services and positions that relied on the levels below theirs. First came food, then came fuel, then came land transportation, then came distribution, then came air transportation. I couldn't envision what needed to occur after that. Industry? Retail? Certainly city management. Road maintenance. Make that infrastructure maintenance, encompassing dams and bridges. What about emergency services? Who was going to regulate new building to make sure things were done according to code? Could we force a new, more stringent building code in place to lessen the damage done by hurricanes? The Romans knew that enough concrete would stop damned near anything. With subgrade construction and heavy angled exposed walls, a bunker-like construction paradigm might keep the horrible reconstruction expenses down in the future. The island would always get hurricanes. As for continued control and professional staffing, all I could hope for at that point was for the Legion platoons designated for this exercise to disband and take up Grenadian citizenship. It would be tough at first, as we would be in the same shoes as a remote colony. Perhaps I should petition the United Nations General Assembly to establish a 5-year protectorate on the island to keep out any opportunistic states. See above. When the FFL captain landed and came to call, I introduced myself and described the situation to the best of my abilities. Then I handed him my notes. He wandered off, flipping pages. As a native Canadian, I was able to communicate with him easily in his native tongue, French. The next morning, I met once more with Captain Lessort. You have quite a comprehensive plan of action here. However, you must agree that there are gaping holes. What of policing? What of short, medium, and long-term vendors? The troops must be kept supplied with incidentals and entertained. We shall require much construction material and equipment. And as for this, are you truly willing to homestead legionnaires? I nodded, without a qualm. He smiled. I have discussed this with my superiors. Several companies of legionnaires from North Africa shall soon be arriving. They shall need either equipment and supplies to build their base or have the authority to commandeer existing structures. By all means, use what you find. It shall reduce time and labor. Change what you find to fit your needs. There are many of us that are nearing retirement. With this, you have made a great friend in France and her legion. Now, first we must find construction equipment, then secure fuel and tankers. Then we can scour the island. Make it so, Captain. The old towns would be torn down and the farms preserved. I worked on buying tractors, field equipment, seed and fertilizer from France and Germany. We would need truck gardens, large vegetable gardens, as well as new orchards for fruit, nuts and avocados. We had the climate to support them. By eliminating golf courses, we had the water to irrigate them as well. Not 100 feet from the dock lay a large house complex. I took it over for an administration center. Some of the Legion brothers put up cork boards and ran telephones to a row of desks. We put in computers and a small network. I contracted to have a satellite uplink-downlink station installed and leased 2 satellite transceivers on an equatorial communications satellite. Soon we had internet access. I put up a web page describing what had happened and what we planned. It soon made the front page of several popular online news sites such as Dig and Reddit. With the approval of the captain and his support team, we solicited immigrants. Soon we had responses from Guyana and Venezuela. We soon had farmers that were happy to have their own land and equipment. When I heard stories of narcotic traffickers muscling in, I notified the Legion. No quarter was given. There would be no cocoa traffic going through the country. The fields were beautiful. The new buildings were built close to the ground. Over the years, the old city structures were torn down and new bunker-style buildings replaced them. In many areas of the city, underground tramways used electric buses to move people and supplies, especially to and from the airport and seaport. A simple underground ring was established and scheduled runs were made. Out in the countryside, the farmers were busy. The great nutmeg plantations were manned and producing fruit for export. There were a sprinkling of schools and clinics throughout the island, and the tourists were coming back. I fostered open markets and big picnics featuring local foods, bands, and dances. Smaller tour boats with 100 or so passengers were coming to visit regularly. We were due to start up a local television station and at least 2 radio stations. I was a firm believer in public radio, so one station was going to become a Gulf NPR with 24-hour music. When we reached 15,000 people, I called for a general election with a $1,000 cap on election funds per candidate. I made sure that the newspaper space remained cheap so that the people seeking office could explain their positions. A basic constitution was in place. The infrastructure was operating. We had a bank. Nobody was hungry. I was out $160 million. I traded on that for a villa and a small harbor on the northwest end of the island called Duquesne Bay. The necessary equipment was purchased, the well was dug, and power put in. I had a small port dugout and built a hacienda below ground with a central open area. I had the land cleared, flattened, fertilized, and plowed. Then a farm built along with all the necessary incidental buildings such as a machine shed, chicken house, and milk room. The family I worked with agreed to farm and maintain the place. According to our contract, they would own the farm after 7 years. They had enough prepared fields to raise wheat, clover, and a truck garden. They raised goats, chickens, and a couple milch cows for milk, cream, butter, and cheese so that their kids had fresh. They had a good life, but everything manufactured had to be shipped or flown in for the time being, as basic industries hadn't restarted yet anywhere on the island. The retired legionnaires and their families were making their mark. When some young punk acted up in a bar or nightclub, they usually got the shit kicked out of them by somebody's old uncle. It had been a long 9 years. I had been voted out of office. No big deal. Let the young Turks make their own mistakes. Max had left me. I hoped that he found his other half in the jungles. Once I had realized that I'd be on the island for a while, I'd had the ship dry docked and cleaned out. I had all the tanks on my ship steamed out and the fuel refilled. Then I took a trip to Port of Spain, Trinidad, where I had a full cleaning, reconditioning, and upgrade done on my ship. She was hauled out and the hull repainted. I had the on-deck freezer and the heat pump replaced as state-of-the-art had become a lot more efficient in the 10 years or so it had been since they'd been installed. I spent some time at the federal building listening to the legislators debate. I was tempted to stand up and lecture them on their foolishness as the governor emeritus of Grenada, but my position held no real weight other than my moral views, and that didn't buy butter for the popcorn. I did some vacation things and bought new clothes as my body's proportions had changed over the years. I bought replacement medical supplies, emptied out the larder, and restocked with foodstuffs that weren't 5 years past their end of cycle. I made sure all the propane tanks were full, even the one on the barbecue grill at the end of the stern deck. I had the mattresses and cushions changed out and any rugs cleaned. I bought new pillows, towels, and linens. The drapes were taken down, cleaned, and replaced. I had the engines and spares checked for dry or cracked hoses, seals, and belts. I headed down the coast, looking for some place attractive, somewhere to catch my attention. I found Buenos Aires. I was 55, and it really was time to retire. The trouble was I didn't know snot about Spanish. There was a solution for everything if you had money. Across the river lay Montevideo. I explained to the tired-looking man at the visa desk that I wanted to stay around long enough to gain a working knowledge of Spanish via the English school. He thought it reasonable and granted me a 1-year non-commercial visa. I went looking for a berth. Can you believe it? There were no available non-commercial berths in the entire city. I used Google Maps to find the Club La Restinga next to a primitive water access protected by a good breakwater. I anchored offshore and motored in to talk with the club's owner. Yep, he owned the whole point, but he didn't have the capital to develop it. I offered a deal. I would front him the cash to build out 3 modern 500-foot-long piers with power, water, electric, phone, cable, and internet taps. He would make sure that I had a place to lay up whenever I came to visit. I also laid out the bucks for a refueling pier with sanitary pump-out facilities. He snapped up the deal, and I had a good tie-up within a month. I fronted him another $100,000 for a real clubhouse for his Seminole Yacht Club. The thing started feeding off of itself. A small grocery built a shop near the club's front gate. A cleaning company started a regular branch near the docks that offered bonded ship cleaning services. Then a restaurant moved in. It grew quickly from that. Our contract specified a 5-year repayment plan. He paid everything off in 2. I don't know which was prouder about his successes, him or me. The last I heard, he was getting financing to double the size of his on-water operation. I contacted the English school. They were experts at teaching students to be bilingual. I offered them $100,000 plus the wages of the teachers involved to teach me as much Spanish as they could over the summer. I did roughly a course a month. When we parted in late September, I was sufficiently proficient to read a newspaper and hold a conversation. Granted, I didn't have a native's comprehension, but I got along. I spent the fall wandering around the city, soaking up the culture. When my 6 months had passed, I motored over to Buenos Aires to once more go through the inspections involved in getting a new visa. I asked for and received a year-long renewable tourist visa. My proof of solvency helped grease matters along. I scanned the harbor at the yacht club Puerto Madero. It was one hell of a long dock, and the open slips were near the ends. I found that unacceptable. I paid a healthy $2,000 gift to have another ship move to give me close access to the shore. I leased the slip for a year with an option to extend. There was a 100% surcharge for liveaboards which I paid. This gave me access to reduced-cost on-site pump-out facilities, unmetered water, and cheaper electricity. All in all, I found it a reasonable deal. I hooked up my ship's network high-speed modem to the provided DSL port for internet. Then I bought a rapid transit pass, the SUB card, and started to get to know the city. First, I took several tour buses and mapped out most of the barrios. I found the Chinatown, bookstores, museums, and galleries. In a city of almost 3 million, I was certain to find a surprise around almost every corner. I spent over a year exploring the city and having a damned good time of it. The climate was such that I actually saw frost and snow some mornings. It was then that I realized that I was insane. It had been 11 odd years since I'd seen snow, and I missed it. I guess that I was truly Canadian at heart. I missed the hockey, the snow, the ice, and the Quebecois jokes. I missed going outside without a shirt on at 40 degrees after a long winter to try and kickstart a suntan. I was going back home. I carefully pulled out my cold weather gear and examined it. 10 years in storage had done it all in. I needed everything from a new Mad Bomber's hat to wellies and everything in between. I knew that I certainly wouldn't find what I wanted in South America. The ship got a once-over. I paid my bills, the tanks got treated, and the diesel topped off. I was off. My first hop was to Rio de Janeiro. It was a huge city with plenty of bookstores. I indulged myself, then continued on my journey. Up the coast, Fortaleza was a popular refueling stop. Caracas had cheap fuel prices courtesy of the Venezuelan oil fields and local refineries. I went through U.S. immigration in Puerto Rico, then headed for Port Canaveral in Central Florida. My next fueling stop was near Atlantic City in New Jersey. I stopped in Portland, Maine for fuel and to go clothing shopping. It was coming up on fall in the Northern Hemisphere, but it was still early. I was glad that the stores shifted inventory for the next season earlier than seemed prudent. It served me well that day. I found a big, puffy goose-down parka and a smaller goose-down jacket. I knew that I'd have to ease into acclimatizing to cold weather after all that time. I found another place that sold working Helly Hansen gear where I did some damage to my wallet. A few incidentals like a few sets of synthetic sweats, a Mad Bomber hat, wellies, wool socks, a neoprene face mask, and 4 sets of silk long underwear filled my shopping list. My destination was just ahead of me. I was going to drop anchor at Halifax, Nova Scotia. First and foremost came a stop at the Coast Guard dock for in-processing. Then I convinced the Dartmouth Yacht Club to sign me up for a slip with power and water. My next step was to buy into a long-term slip that accommodated liveaboards. There was only one problem. There were no slips that accommodated liveaboards in the Halifax-Dartmouth complex. My next step? Build one, of course. I made an appointment to speak with one of the partners of Secunda Marine Services. Now, these were big guys that ran supply and recovery operations on the North Atlantic. I just wanted to repurpose some of their property opposite the Coast Guard dock. I brought my A game. I asked to buy in for $50 million, then fund 2 full-service 300-foot piers, set up a refueling dock and a mobile pump-out service, all for liveaboards. There was to be some day service tie-ups for commuters, but that would be limited. It was centrally located to the city, well protected, and would have room for perhaps 30 or 40 vessels. I had hopes to buy the burned-out half-block across the path from Secunda, to build a prefab house on, and provide 30 parking spaces or so. Terry was amenable, but a few other agencies had to agree to it, and zoning had to be procured. I bought the property easily enough. It had to be scraped down and the fill removed to a hazardous materials landfill before it could be built back up and construction could occur. I hadn't quite conceived of the proportions when I first saw the site. I had 40 numbered pads asphalted and power poles set at each one for engine heaters. I bought a 2-bedroom prefab home with an attached 2-car garage before Thanksgiving. There was a metal fabrication shop only a block away, so I didn't have to put up a machine shop. I did, however, put a CAD station and D-size plotter in my 2nd bedroom. By the next July, everything was ready. I moved my ship to her new berth. With a little advertising throughout southern Ontario and Quebec, we soon had applicants. We had a lawyer design the contract to allow us to kick out polluters, rednecks, and other generally obnoxious folk. If anyone did something really stupid, why the Coast Guard was right across the cove. We investigated what liveaboards paid in other harbors and slightly undercut that. We also priced our fuel a bit less than that of the other yacht clubs in Dartmouth Harbor. Volume fuel purchases gained us a bit of economic leverage, so our lower prices were not only competitive but lucrative. I furnished the house and populated the kitchen with some decent appliances. The rest of the place got the attention of an interior designer. I specified a dark mission oak theme and let him go to town. A little Nissan pickup with a fiberglass top got me around town. I found Sobeys Grocery, several locations, Atlantic Superstore, and the Atlantic Meat Market. Main Street was fun. I had the fancy that taken out for the winter. All the tanks were drained and a series of 70-watt trouble lights and metal buckets were left on throughout the ship to keep everything above 10 degrees or so. I figured it all would freeze, so the galley stores were transferred to the house. I opened the instrumentation console and put a lit bulb under there as well. I figured that the confined area would keep the electronics above freezing, so I wouldn't have to have everything recalibrated in the spring. All the water lines were blown out with compressed air. I threw an industrial holding tank deodorizer into the black water tank to keep any science experiments from developing a measurable IQ or a means to escape. The house was so large in comparison to the available space shipboard, I felt as if I were rattling around like a marble in a bucket. I had to develop entirely new patterns of action to keep from blindly wandering from room to room. I was a psychology experiment in the wild. I got my driver's license updated and my place of residence changed with my trust corporation. Sure, there were a lot of music venues around town and a lot of museums, but I wanted something structured to take my time over the winter. I had to look hard to find a cooking school. The Nova Scotia Community College in Halifax had a 2-year culinary program. The second year was focused on the skills necessary to make a cook useful in a restaurant environment. I just wanted the first-year courses. My Coast Guard medical training allowed me to opt out of their first aid segment. All the rest I found interesting. Not that it meant that much to me, but I did pretty well on the exams as well. I made it no secret that I was in it simply for the skills. One of the staff thought that the world revolved around his attitude. He got up in my face and blew his bad breath and spittled at me in front of the entire class. I suppose that you're going to take a partial degree and manufacture a full certification out of it, making a fool out of you and making us look like shit. I put my hand over his face with my palm under his chin, put the toes of one shoe behind one of his ankles, and shoved up and out for all I was worth. He sailed about 6 feet and landed on his butt. Fool. I'm studying for my own kitchen, not your half-martinet reputation, you little wannabe Escoffier. I didn't see him again. About the only thing they didn't cover that I had an interest in was meat cutting and sausage making. They were pretty specialized subjects, so I wasn't too cheesed off. Cheese making was another one of those wouldn't it be nice subjects. Alas, there were no schools in the art both available and close by. The sauce and stock class was what was expected. I immensely enjoyed the baking segment. The vegetable course was interesting and showed me new flavor pairings. I learned how easy it is to make my own pasta and ravioli. The seafood course was pretty cool. I learned to work with phyllo dough in the desserts course. Small cakes, upside-down cakes, and pies are a blast to make. They're a lot more forgiving than the full-size products. Notes on where to get top-of-the-line fillings and other ingredients had a lot of value for me. I started school at the beginning of the winter semester and knew I'd have to return the next year for the fall term to finish what I wanted. In the meantime, I bought a few kitchen tools: a pasta maker, a high-temp oven suitable for pizza, a steam injection bread oven, a half rack of half-sheet pans, a proofing oven, and some small pie molds. As a teen, I'd had a memorable steak and kidney pie and remembered the flavor well. I spent a few weeks recreating the dish, which froze well. I made a deal with a local bar restaurant to sell them, and they did well as deep dish 6-inch pies. Once thawed, they just needed to be heated through until steaming and browned. I read a book on charcuterie cover to cover and tried a few things, then made a deal with a local butcher who agreed to teach me. When I finished, he handed me my journeyman butcher's papers with a flourish. A good man. Under his guidance, I experimented with a hot Italian sausage mix, adding hot pepper flakes, oregano, and garlic until I had a truly bold sausage. Combined with a sweet yet spicy sauce and plenty of good cheese, it made for an outstanding pizza. I also perfected sweating down cremini mushrooms until they were chewy and packed with flavor, finally declaring myself satisfied with the result when added to the pie. I'd been in town about 3 years. I kept my hair and beard short because I thought the pepper and salt look suited me better. I still had good strength in my legs, arms, hands, and core. I walked every day and didn't drink excessively. About 5 days a month, I made steak and kidney pies for the bar Maggie's. After deliveries, I'd hang out and chat with the manager, sharing a couple of short drinks of whatever she recommended. We got along pretty well. So, what have you done with your life? You seem pretty happy with yourself, not like a lot of the folks I see in here. Well, I was the emergency governor of Grenada. I got the infrastructure and economy running from a totally dead stop. Get out of here. Pictures, or it didn't happen. I smiled a little smile and brought my battle-scarred briefcase to the top of the bar. I popped it open and brought out my certificate naming me a French officier de la Légion d'honneur, then brought out the little box I carried with my medal within. I showed them to her. These are usually granted as a courtesy to governors, but I earned mine. This award was earned getting that economy in shape, as well as for finding homes for a couple thousand retiring members of the French Foreign Legion along with whatever families that they'd managed to build. The French take their Legion very, very seriously. She read through the commendation. Curtis Stoner? I nodded. I remember reading about that. You must have pumped some serious money into that mess, or they'd still be back in the Stone Age, like Haiti after the earthquake. I guess I looked kind of sad as I slowly put everything back in my case. She quickly continued. Don't let me bring you down if you don't want to talk about it. No, it's not that. I've still got citizenship there. I left on good terms. I own a villa there that I may never see again. I smiled a little at her. You see, I'm crazy. I found out that I missed the climate and the culture here. After a decade away, I got homesick. Now I'm kind of kicking back, doing what I want to. Cooking school allowed me to recreate a steak and kidney pie that I used to love as a kid. You reap the benefits. I looked her over. She was pleasant enough to watch, in a handsome sort of way. High cheekbones, unusual light-colored amber eyes, slim nose and chin, curly auburn hair. What's your story? She shrugged. Elizabeth Corning. I go by Liz. We shook hands. I don't need this job, either. I run a string of this place and 4 others like it, just for something to do. It keeps a bunch of people happily employed, keeps customers happy, and keeps me out of real trouble. I had to ask. Corning Glass? She nodded. I pointed my thumb at my chest. Stoner arms, we bumped knuckles. I had an idea. Want to hang out? It's coming up on spring. I've got a 42-foot ship in dry dock. I'll get her back in the water and have a team go over her to make sure she's safe and sound. It's been a couple years since the Imagine that has been in the water. Want to screw off for a summer? Explore the Caribbean? She sat erect. Damn, you work fast. I'm not saying no, but I've got to get my staff ready for something like that. No problem. It'll take a month or 2 to survey and repair the ship. I need to stock the galley, make sure all the batteries are fresh, get the tanks checked, exercise and care for the water maker, genset, and main engine. You get the idea. She grinned a gammon grin. Cool. What's your cell number? We traded numbers, which I dutifully punched into my phone. Damn. I had to see what contracts I had to address aboard ship, such as the Serious Weather Link and the satellite internet. I wanted to do a couple of things with the galley since I'd taken those courses. I also had a new appreciation for the top-end Cisco products, now that I knew how to use them properly. The trouble was most of the baking supplies were packaged for the cruise line market, which were too much for my little vessel. I'd have to purchase the goods and portion them out at the house. A heat sealer would do the job. I'd have to invite Lizzie to my house for a night of homemade pizza and wine to discuss mutually enjoyable movies and music. There was a lot of new music and movies out there that I hadn't reviewed. I had time. The good part was, I wasn't in a hurry. I became recertified for my captain's certificates and had the ship put back into the water. Nothing leaked. First good sign. All the usual maintenance tasks were performed for a ship that had experienced extended dry dock. My light bulb thing seemed to have done its job. The ship passed its certifications with flying colors. I had no cracked plastics or wood. After 3 years in storage, all that cherry sure soaked up the lemon oil though. I got every nook, cranny and bit of wall oiled and rubbed to a sheen. It smelled wonderful. I'd missed my wraparound stereo. I sat at the helm with my eyes closed, just feeling the ship gently rock at dockside. I knew I had an unseemly big grin on my face. Why did I let this get away from me? Everything in the salon locker got reviewed, replaced, or cleaned. I took out my medical gear and gave it all the hairy eyeball. I had to replace batteries, of course, and replenish my supplies. I also replaced batteries on the aiming lasers in the arms locker. Again, I threw away all my old batteries and replaced them. The same for the low-light monocle. I had a center V-section crafted for the space between the old berths and had the mattress replaced with something wider. It wasn't quite custom-made, as V-berth mattresses were sold worldwide. I just had to find a vendor. I had to spend some tender loving care on my computers to get the system patches up to snuff. I took her out for a cruise, renewing my touch at the helm. I got a wild hair up my butt. I went out to the banks and used the fish finder to locate a shoal of fish. I set the autopilot to station keeping. I got down my fishing tackle and pulled a half pint of frozen chicken livers out of the chest freezer. I was patient with it and used a flashy spoon with the liver on the hook. I hooked something. I had an enjoyable hour or so bringing in about a 16-pound haddock. I gutted and headed it, then packed it on ice in a garbage bag. I cleaned up the deck with a hose, put everything away, and motored back to the dock. I cut the carcass up into good, thick steaks and gave most away to some of the other liveaboards that I knew. I cut mine into big chunks, peppered and floured the chunks, and deep-fried them in a pot of hot oil on the stove. That reminded me. I had to get the propane levels checked. It had been years. That was a job for the morning. I cleaned up, took a hot shower, and slept in my berth that night. In the morning, I got my act back together. I started making meat pies. First, I started a couple pounds of butter warming to clarify. I used a cold table process to make the dough, then cut it into sections, wrapped them, and refrigerated them. Then I chopped and pre-cooked the filling. While it simmered and softened, I lined the first batch of shells and baked them off. I had a big batch of phyllo dough in the fridge waiting to top them. Once the filling was done, I put that pot aside to cool and started another. I cut out rounds of 20 layers of phyllo with a light brush of butter in between the layers and covered them with damp towels. The extra space of the kitchen table sure helped matters. I quickly filled the shells, topped them with phyllo, pinched them closed, brushed them heavily with clarified butter, and cut a few steam slits in the top. When I had a half dozen finished, they went onto a tray and into the quick chiller. After I'd finished 10 dozen, I made one for me and finished baking it off. I savored the flavors. Yup, just like I'd remembered. Mushrooms, beef liver, and good lean roast cooked until they were ready to fall apart along with onions and celery, all in a dark brown sauce made from homemade beef stock. The calorie count was a killer, but it sure tasted good. I cleaned up the kitchen and headed for bed. It was Friday morning. When I had gotten up, I wrapped the frozen pies in cling wrap and packed them in ice chests. I went down to Maggie's bar to drop off my shipment. Lizzie was there, waiting. We sat and talked while the staff took the product back to their walk-in freezer. How about coming over for dinner tonight? I make a mean sausage and mushroom pizza. She playfully asked, "Will I be safe with you, Mr. Stoner?" I leered back. "As safe as you want to be, lassie." She laughed. "It's a date. You know, it's the first date I've had in years." I gave her my address. We agreed on 6 that night. When the staff came back with my empty coolers, I apologized that I had to leave. I had a lot to do between then and 6. I had to stop to make at the butcher shop for some pork. Back at the house, I mixed up enough dough for 4 small pizzas and set it rising under cling film. Pizza dough is heavy and rich with olive oil. It can really try a mixer. I attached the sausage head to the mixer and set in a coarse wheel. I rough chopped the pork while it was nearly frozen, then ran a lot of garlic through a little blender. That got added to the sausage mix along with red pepper flakes, oregano, and some salt. A few other spices went in, but that was the majority. It all got run through the cutter again to mix and regularize the cut. The result was put into a bowl in the fridge until later. The sausage grinder immediately got taken apart and fed into the dishwasher with the temp set on high. I got out the block mozzarella and set it in the freezer to get firm. While that was working, I pulled out a big bag of cremini mushrooms and some white button mushrooms. They all got sliced about 3 to 8 inch thick and sweated in a pan with a little oil until they darkened and did some sizzling as the water evaporated. When the cheese was firm, I grated enough for 4 pizzas. I put aside the toppings and started working on the sauce. I used a good, fast homemade spaghetti sauce with twice the spices and double the tomato paste at the end. Look up Godfather's spaghetti sauce recipe on the web. Fascinating and fast. It was 10 to 6. I popped 2 pizzas into the pre-warmed 450-degree oven and opened a bottle of Red Zinfandel. Lizzie showed up at the doorstep promptly at 6. We had 10 more minutes of smelling the pizzas before they were ready. My evil plan was coming together. It was an advertising campaign for the nose, similar to movie theaters blowing the exhaust from their popcorn makers out over the audience. We talked about nothing much at first. Once the first 2 pies were done, they had to rest 10 minutes to keep from fusing molten cheese to the roofs of our mouths. The next 2 pies went into the ovens, and I set a timer going. I carried it in my shirt pocket. I poured the wine, and we chowed down. I thought that it balanced well. Granted, it was a strongly seasoned pizza, but it also tasted very good when cold. That was why I made 4-1 for each of us for the next day. Once the second set of pizzas came out and were cooling on the racks, I turned off the oven and invited Lizzie down to the boat to see what she was getting into. She was surprised that the dock was only a half block from my back door. What's with all the parking spaces? These are for the other liveaboards. You'll see, once we cross this tree line. The harbor opened up before us in the fading light. Most of the ships at anchor were lit up, and a regular row of hooded orangish security lights were lit, illuminating the shore, but not shining out over the ships or the harbor. A security fence with a card access gate secured the dock area at night. A guard was hired to watch the place. Here she is, they imagine that, a 42-foot steel-hulled tugboat-style yacht. Come on aboard. I unlocked the dockside hatchway that lead into the wheelhouse. I went into brag mode. She's lined with dark cherry. There's a full instrumentation suite including electronic charts and satellite weather imagery. I pointed to the stairs leading down towards the bow. Down there are the main bunk, shower and head, or toilet. There's tools, spares and access to the mechanical room too. I took her down a few steps aft into the salon. Here's the galley, and what's called the salon. There's no real table, just the marble top here that breaks into the galley. It makes a great desk and breakfast bar-style space. Two can sit at it. There's a washer and dryer right there. She's got a distributed sound system, a movie player, and seating for 6, bunk space for 3. The bunk at the nose is a double, and this bench here was widened to be both a bunk and an emergency medical bed. There's a pilot's emergency bunk in the wheelhouse, but it isn't very wide. It's for snoozing while making way and letting the autopilot do the work. A buzzer would go off if anything needed attention, such as someone crossing our path, making a close approach, or lying in our path, or within a 2 or 5 mile limit, depending on the settings. I showed off the larder. This used to be a second head. That made no sense to me. I had it all torn out, which more than doubled the galley store's capacity. We went out on the aft deck. There's a chest freezer, that's a gas grill. Under that tarp is a Vespa scooter for shopping and such. Behind this, I wrapped on the hatch. We've got 4 big 50-pound propane tanks for the water heater and kitchen. Mounted up over the salon is a heat exchanger that both heats and cools. I let us back inside to sit in the stools near the galley. Well, what do you think? There's so much in so little space. How did you get used to living in such a tiny compartment? It's no worse than a travel trailer. Most areas are multi-use. Look at these huge windows. They're designed to combat claustrophobia. When you look out and see the ocean all around you or a sandy beach, it all comes together. This is a refuge, not a cage. She smiled and nodded. I can see it now. This is a comfortable place. All this wood smells wonderful and makes it quite luxurious, but I imagine that it takes a bit of care. That's one of the drawbacks. The maintenance and the limits on some of the resources. For example, there's a 20-gallon drinking water tank, a 30-gallon hot water heater that feeds from it, and 2 100-gallon tanks for washing, laundry, and showering. She has a water maker that makes drinkable water from salt water at about 1.3 gallons per hour. I nodded at the separate faucet in the galley sink. That's the only place that can access the drinking water. Oh, there's an ice maker that draws from it as well. I normally keep that turned down low unless there's a party planned or I'm going fishing. I can see living here. I suppose I should see the sleeping space, the shower and toilet before I commit, though. Have at it. You know where the passageway and ladder is to get there. Be careful in the machine room. There's automated systems down there that turn on and off on their own. Dangling clothing can get you killed in there. She headed towards the bow and the passageway below. She came back smiling. I like it. The toilet is roomy, and so is the shower. Everything is clean and smells good. I think we're on. All right, a couple points. 1. Legal things. You need to have a valid passport, an up-to-date shot record, plus proof. I carry that, my captaincy papers, a copy of my proof of ownership of this vessel, and all my certificates in a briefcase that always goes with me in a port of call. That way I can carry any cash or checkbook as well as a notebook securely. 2. Your ship's bag. Since we have a washer and dryer, you won't need to take much along. Think 1 nice sized drawer. There's a little hanging space for a dress and a coat, but you'll really have to limit yourself. Mostly it's shorts, a sleeveless top, and canvas boat shoes for summer in the Gulf. I'm fine with all that. I've traveled in Europe before with just a carry-on. You have to really limit yourself when using their train systems. Great. When do we lift anchor? Monday morning suit you? You're on. Good. I've got a pizza for you to take home. They're great when cold. On Saturday, I looked on the web for a list of the top 20 movies of the last decade. I'd not seen any of them, so I went on a shopping trip. I also looked through the sci-fi department of a larger bookstore to see what series that I'd missed and appealed to my taste. I bought some new Neil Gaiman stuff and bought another copy of Angels and Demons as I wanted to reread it. Next, I spent some time in the wine section of the government liquor board outlet. American liquor stores were much more friendly, so I held off my purchases until we crossed the border. We'd have to get fuel in the States on our way south anyway. Sunday, I bought a lot of toilet paper, paper towels, and lemon oil. I thoroughly soaked the interior woodwork and polished it up. I moved perishables and frozen goods from the house to the ship and mothballed the house. I called my trust company to let them know I was in cruising mode again and bound for the Gulf. They had my sat phone number, so I wouldn't really be out of contact. They'd take care of any bills or emergencies that had to do with the house and property. They were good at that. That's what kept me with them. I did a little writing that night. It was just a little editing and tuning of what I had active, nothing that kept me up late at night. I remembered to make a sign for over the head, stating no paper goods in the head except for fast breakdown toilet paper. I had a macerator pump, but didn't want to rely on it. At promptly 6 a.m. Lizzie showed up with a briefcase and a small duffel. She was smiling and ready to go. I got her settled in and made a small pan of cinnamon rolls while she unpacked. She groaned as she bit into the warm confection. Keep cooking like this, and I'll never leave. Why, fair maiden, you have deduced my evil plan. She almost snorted coffee onto the counter. By 7 we were backing out of the slip. So what does it take to be able to drive this thing? About 4 to 6 months of classroom work, some time in hands-on classes, and a 6-month apprenticeship. You can slide on the last if you're not commercial. Having a good electronic stack and top-end electronic charts makes up for a lot. I showed her what was coming up on the display. I had the radar display overlaid on top of the local chart. We headed out 5 miles, then down the coast. She settled back on the settee to watch while I piloted us down the coast. Not much will happen until we need more fuel. Then I'll make the decision where to stop to fill up. I'll call ahead on the radio telephone and get directions and reserve a slip. It's all pretty simple if you've done it before. This is the boring part. I could catch a nap if I wanted. The electronics would buzz me if I were needed. Is there anything I can do? Tell you what. See if you can find the book I just bought. I want to reread Angels and Demons. Then, if you want, go look through the music, books, and movies. Whatever you don't see and can't live without, or want to see, we'll pick up. Take notes. The same with the galley stores. I bought what someone thought were the top 20 movies of the last decade last Saturday, so we'll have something to watch. I hope that there's not many howlers in there. She came back with my book and I settled into reading. After a while, I heard the traveling Wilburys on the stereo. The day passed smoothly. When I took a bathroom break, I found her engrossed in my captaincy training guides. Around 4, I started looking around for somewhere to stop for the night. We weren't in a rush. There was only one place to tie up within decent range though, and that was at Yarmouth. We filled up and paid for an overnight berth, remaining on ship's systems. It was bacon, egg and cheese sandwiches on toast for breakfast. Lizzie said she'd clean up as I wanted to get some decent mileage behind us that day. At 6 we were motoring down the Seaway and due west. It was close to 9 that night that we docked in Portland. Customs was closed for the day, so we tied up at the customs dock and called it a day. I took a nice hot shower to relax, and Lizzie did as well. She got short-shifted on the hot water, but not by much. We then decided that one of us would shower in the morning, one in the evening. In the morning we passed through customs, got our visa stamps, and loaded up with fuel. I'd been in Portland before. We took a taxi to the mall and spent some time wandering about. The food court hadn't changed much. It was enthusiastic, but beige. I had some Chinese noodle thing with onions and chicken, while Lizzie had a bourbon chicken dish. I think she got the better half of the deal on that one. I bought 4 orders of bourbon chicken to go along with some rice. I wanted some for dinner and some for lunch the next day. It wasn't breaded and looked good. We went back to the ship to relax. The bourbon chicken got put on hold. That evening it was rock lobster, soft shell crab, fresh bread, and craft beer. Now that was a good feed. We sort of fell into the cab on the ride back. I didn't know about Liz, but I sure slept well. I decided to push for some distance. I got us underway about 5:45 that morning. I took us 20 miles out before pointing the bow south. We were far enough out from the coast that the traffic spread out and the collision control didn't go into convulsions. I read, relaxed, slept, and read some more for 24 solid hours on duty. I motored into Chesapeake Bay and headed for a berth at East Beach. We were down to 20% reserves, which was as far as I wanted to take it under the circumstances. We refueled, and I spent the day in my bunk getting some solid hours of sleep. That night I got up and did my pilot thing all over again. I got a good price for fuel at the commercial docks on Dodge Island. It was a busy area, so I had to get out of there fast. Just a couple miles down the coast, Dinner Key and Marina had a pump-out station and a short-term berth for us. There was a lot of nightlife in the area. We dressed up and hit the town for the evening. Roughly 1 mile north and 5 miles west were a pair of huge malls, side by side. The power of modern advertising. What a joke. I hate to denigrate Miami pop culture, but there it is. Jewelry stores, little gold necklace ornaments, popped collars, and Michael Jackson sequin gloves. God help us all. It was after midnight before we got back to the ship. We sat down with a thump. God, what a bust. You said it. I must admit, though, that I've never seen such pursuit of youth as a way of life. It was to the point of a mania. Forever 21? We both broke into laughter. Within the hour we were in bed, asleep. The area had nothing to hold us. It was a short trip to Nassau, maybe 150 miles. We made it in one long day. They got pissed off and billed you extra for coming in after their sacred quitting time, so we spent the night off the chain outside their jurisdiction. I unlocked the armory and set the radar to wake me up on a 1-mile approach. It was nearly morning. The alarm went off and scared me out of a sound sleep. I was standing up before I knew why. There was a red panel flashing approach on the radar screen. I quickly grabbed the helmet and monocle from below, loaded a 40mm grenade into the M18's grenade launcher, and stepped out onto the foredeck. I had 2 more rounds in my pockets. I spotted an approaching cutter. They were very quiet. They got to about a football field away when I raised the grenade vernier, sighted them in, and squeezed the trigger. I was just a little short. The round quietly disappeared into the water. I sincerely doubted that they noticed as their speed and bearing didn't change. I quickly loaded another round and tried again. I must have hit something important because crap flew everywhere and a fire broke out. The ship was gone by dawn. I didn't see any survivors. I didn't think that Lizzie even woke up. I put everything away, cleared the alert, and went back to sleep. I was wound up so it took a while. I tore myself out of bed at about 9 o'clock. Lizzie was too perky for reality. I sat down to a cup of tea and a hot ham and cheese sandwich for breakfast. I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that we were in a pitched battle on a calm sea. I slowly pulled out the empty 40mm cartridges and placed them on the table. Clink, clink. You didn't dream it. She sat there with her mouth open, looking at the used shells. She eventually spoke. Wow, what happened? I stretched and had another gulp of hot, sweet tea. The radar's proximity alarm woke me about 4:30. A very quiet cutter tried to visit us. At about 120 yards, I fired a shell at them. It hit short, and the sea swallowed it. I reloaded and hit them just aft of amidships. It disabled their engine controls and started a fuel fire. By dawn, there was nothing left. No survivors. She looked really rattled. I placed my hand on the table, palm up. She hesitated, but took it. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. You would never have been seen or heard from again. Her face went pale. I pulled her close and held her steady. After a while, she settled down. I asked, "Do you handle a gun?" She nodded. I led her forward to the arms locker. "Want to use a pistol?" She smiled and went below. She came back with a small waist satchel, reached inside, and pulled out a Glock 32. Well, color me impressed. I've done matches and decision courses. I do pretty well. Is there an aiming laser on it? No, why? In combat, every advantage counts. It's often dark, wet, and messy. You need a frame-mounted aiming laser or tritium sights for low light. Lizzie shrugged. Whatever works. I'll call the family security company for more ammo, a rangefinder, and another M18 with a grenade launcher. We can meet in San Juan in a week or two. Let's say 2 weeks. Sound good? She smiled at me. You're the pro. I laughed. Pro indeed. It seemed like we had to go through customs every time we moved the ship. I got off scot-free as a governor emeritus of Grenada. Since Lizzie was in my party, it eased the way for her as well. We settled into the Nassau Yacht Club. We dressed for shore, grabbed our briefcases, loaded with pistols and ammunition, and headed up to the main building. Suddenly, a familiar face came running down the path toward us, full of excitement and relief. Curtis, you came back. Emma. She was smiling through tears. I hugged her and gently helped her stand. What are you still doing here? Didn't you know? We own this place. Wow. Oh, Liz. Meet Emma. The last time I saw her, she was about 16, I said quickly, trying to ease any awkwardness after our last deep-sea fishing trip. Emma, this is Liz, a friend of mine from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Lizzie chuckled, geez. Looks like the competition's pretty tough, wouldn't you say? I smiled quietly and said, there's no competition at all, giving her a friendly one-armed hug. We walked up to the door, with 2 wonderful women by my side. How could I go wrong? Simple. Mama was there, waiting for us. She yelled, oh shit. You again. I muttered, oh hell. The troublemaker from hell. Liz, watch out. This could get ugly. Emma's mom charged at me, ready to give me a piece of her mind. I gently stopped her and sat her down on a bench. I started teasing her lightly, and her angry shouts slowly turned into laughter. That surprised me. I carefully helped her up and stepped back. She hugged me and said quietly, Curtis, I've missed you. Henry died 3 years ago from a heart attack, and everyone's been treating me like I'm fragile ever since. I'm glad you're back. Well, knock me over with a feather. You doing all right now? She shrugged. It's day by day. I've managed to stay off the booze. My silly daughter still talks about you. Gee, I couldn't tell. She took a step back and looked me in the eyes. Would you let her hang out with you and your friend for a while? She keeps comparing all the guys she meets to what she remembers about you. Nobody can come close to a treasured memory. Lizzie and I exchanged looks and silently agreed. Sure, why not? We'll be exploring the islands, aiming for Grenada where I've got a villa and a boat slip. We had dinner in the clubhouse, a mixed seafood grill, and then gave her a warm goodbye on the cheek before heading back to the ship. Curtis, would you keep me company tonight? After seeing her trying to hold it together after losing her husband, it was tough. She still has a good life, but mentally, it's rough. I put my arm around her, and we sat quietly for a while. It was comforting and supportive, nothing more. We both slept well that night. The next morning was pancakes, butter, and jam, messy but delicious when rolled up and eaten with fresh coffee. Around 8, there was the expected knock. Emma was at the door with a small bag. She'd certainly grown into a young woman. Even so, I got another round of hugs that morning. Mom said I could spend the summer with you too. Is that right? She looked hopeful, but ready for a no. Yep. I looked over at Liz. We're about to cast off for Jamaica. A few years ago, I did them a good turn and established a food tourism thing. I'd like to see how it all turned out. We cast off and made way for Kingston. It was about 650 miles, well within our range. We went through customs in Kingston, then headed for Port Antonio, where I'd meddled years before. The yacht club was still there, looking even more prosperous. I paid for a full service slip and got somewhat preferential treatment as a returning customer. I didn't know the guy behind the counter from Adams off Ox, but I asked anyway. The weekend picnics still going strong? He grinned with lots of teeth. Oh yeah? We'd have riots if anyone tried to close them down. There's markets, fresh and cooked food, all sorts of stuff. I nodded to myself. Good. I'm glad that it took off and grew. The guy looked at me kind of curiously. You sound like you know all about it. I helped start the first few feeds and paid for the buildings in 4 parishes. The cruise ships were just starting to point their customers at the events when I left. It was Thursday night. I wanted to see how big it had gotten. I talked about it with the ladies. They wanted to see this as well. About 9 the next morning, we walked the few blocks inland to where it had moved, years ago. I was prepared to be disappointed. Well, that didn't happen. It had spread across the road. The understory to the trees had been cut away and lanes made. It looked like a fairgrounds. There were already people out and about setting up tent flies, setting up barbecues, sitting around tending big closed cookers, drinking beer and listening to the radio. I stopped by a pig roaster to talk to one wrinkled-up old black guy with bright eyes. He was watching everyone, everywhere. Howdy. Say, they still have that pirate gig going on in one of the other parishes? He laughed. Oh yeah? It draws tourists like bees to honey. I was surprised they managed that. The parish was pretty poor to begin with. Once we built the facilities, people really took off with it. He squinted, looking right at me. Do I know you? Have you been here since we put that plastic sheeting on the pole building by the council hall? I built that pole building. Well, I'll be damned. Coming back to the scene of the crime. He called out, Hey Henry, look who's here. A big, older man waddled out from behind a tent. He looked like he'd been washing dishes wet from head to toe, suds up to his elbows. I remembered him as a much thinner guy who used to help run the big grills. Jesus, you back to stir up trouble? He grinned. Nah, I figure I made enough. Just bragging about this place to some nice folks. They didn't believe me. Fooled them, didn't I? The practical Lizzie asked, When do you start serving? The big guy said, Around 4 this afternoon. We go until we run out of food, or until Sunday turns into Monday, whichever comes first. You mind if we hang out with y'all? You'd be welcome hereabouts, no problems. Great. I turned to the women. What do you say we pick up a little table, some aluminum chairs, a cooler of sodas, and a couple decks of cards? Anyone up for euchre? Emma spoke up. I don't know how to play euchre. The old guy said, Oh, you poor deprived child. You stick close to old Nick, and I'll teach you. She smiled at him. Musgrave Market still there? Yep. Block south or so. Ladies, let's scoot so we can get a good spot. We strolled down to the market. I spotted some chairs and a folding table. Lizzie found a wicket picnic basket. We bought lunch meat, cheese, bread and mayo for sandwiches. Emma spotted a molded plastic 16-quart cooler. We filled it with soda, water bottles, and ice. The deli had a couple big baggies I talked them out of to keep the food in the cooler and out of the melt water. They had paper towels and the cards, too. All they had were poker decks, so I bought 2. I ended up carrying the cooler, Lizzie the basket. Em carried the table and chairs. Nick was still there, sipping at a beer even though it was only about 11 in the morning. We set up the table and chairs, then settled in for some gossip and cards. I stripped out the decks to make euchre decks. Nick kept up a patter to Em as we dealt out the cards and bid trump. Then the game started. Lizzie and I played against Nick and Em. We got our butts handed to us. That'll be a lesson: never play euchre for money with anyone older than snot. They'll clean your butt out. About 1 we broke for sandwiches. Nick took 1 too. We talked after we ate. You know, you done good gifting us with this whole thing. Old folks were just sitting around waiting to croak with nothing to do. Now folks make little shit to peddle, help with the cleaning up, the serving and the tills. Everybody helps. The place stays clean and the council doesn't try to shave anybody's but over a mess. They just keep the potties in shape. Even the cops like it. They say it keeps down the domestic disturbance calls. Folk got something to do besides sit around picking fights and arguing about money. Why, one fella polishes and cuts rocks right off the beach. People scoop him right up and pay good money too. You write Jamaica on a dead chicken and somebody's gonna buy it. I got a smart idea. Make little bitty t-shirts. Write on him, made in Jamaica for ladies that got a bun planted here, or a big-bellied mama shirt with an arrow pointing down. Say the same thing. Here's another one, with broader appeal. Collect pieces of wood shit that washes up on the beach. Use a wood burner to write, this washed ashore in Jamaica, the little suckers should sell like hotcakes. Lizzie gave me a speculative look. We gotta market you. That last one would sell anywhere in the islands. She disappeared for a while and came back with a digital camera. She wandered around taking pictures of almost every food booth. 4 o'clock came. The smell of the roasting meat was intoxicating. The pig roaster was opened up and the carcass came out on a big metal spit. Two hefty guys hauled it into the tent where they proceeded to tear it up. Not chop it up, tear it up. It came apart in their glove-covered hands. I pitched in a couple bucks for a few pieces of crisp, smoky fatty skin to munch on. Emma looked a little queasy at first. Don't you dare turn your nose up at this without even giving it a try. I dare you. Soon she was enthusiastically chowing down on the smoky, fatty, crunchy delight like the rest of us. They'd cut off the head and put it to one side. I asked the guys, you doing anything with the head? Nope. Liz, come here. Watch this. I peeled the skin off the cheeks and pulled away the oysters with a serving spoon. Then I borrowed a boning knife to cut away the tongue. I gave them the cheek oysters to try while I took on the delicate process of skinning the tongue. I yelled out, anybody got an onion? Here. I paid the man for a couple sweet onions, then went back to the tongue. I interleaved thin slices of tongue and onion on a platter with a bed of lettuce for garnish and laid it out on the serving line. The older folk knew what it was. We walked around, spending a few bucks here, a few bucks there on fresh shrimp, grilled chicken, a couple different pork recipes, a few salads, some lemon bars, this and that. We all had a bad case of crap. I ate too much. You didn't realize how much you had eaten at a distributed buffet like that. I did get some smoked pig's liver, still hot from the smoker. Wow. We worked over that picnic kit. I caged a trash bag out of our hosts and wrapped the dirty dishes in it so the case wouldn't get nasty with all that grease. It seemed like the party was just getting started when we left about 7. Since we had shore power and water, all three of us could take warm showers, just not long warm showers. In the morning, I wanted to go back. We held off until noon. That gave us the opportunity to spend some quality time on the John. Some of the same people were there, but it was mostly an entirely different crowd serving. It was cheek to jowl with tourists off the boat. I stood up straight and eyeballed the crowd. They looked expectant. I'd bet money that this turns into a meat market after dark. Lizzie looked around. She ran bars and knew how to evaluate a crowd. No bet. Em asked, what's a meat market? Lizzie took the lead. By the way we're using the term, it means a place to casually meet up and connect. The crowd gets restless. People watch each other, looking for a signal to get closer. Then you start to see people interacting, maybe sharing a smile or a friendly touch. Soon, they might hold hands or show some other sign of closeness and quietly drift off looking for a more private spot. In a vacation scene like this, people get bolder and drop the usual hesitations. They know they're all here for a reason and don't have much time to waste. I nodded. After midnight, it can get a lot like a carnival, especially if someone brings out a big stereo. Things tend to get a lot less formal than you'd expect. Look up what a Saturnalia is or was. Lizzie mentioned casually, it usually burns itself out after 3 or 4 hours. People lose energy and sneak off into the bushes for a little rest, sometimes with a friend. Waking up in an unfamiliar place can be an unsettling experience. If you're smooth, you give your companion a friendly goodbye and exchange contact info for later. Emma laughed cheerfully. Sounds like my kind of party. I snorted Pepsi straight out my nose. The others laughed at me while I tried to clear my sinuses. I woke up with 2 heads resting nearby. Both Em and Lizzie were leaning close, and I had a goofy grin on my face after a few minutes. I realized I might never have such a carefree moment again, so I just savored the relaxed, easy feeling of good company around me. I gave a gallant salute and saw that both my companions were awake and ready for the day. I joked, no matter how much we're enjoying this, we need to get up and get moving. We're all young enough to still enjoy some night games and follow through on our promises. We exchanged friendly cheek kisses despite the morning breath and got dressed for the day light and casual. We headed down to the party for shrimp tacos, then took a cab to the next site hosting a weekend fiesta. There were lads and lasses in pirate garb, food vendors just getting organized, and the rest of the partygoers making their way back to rest off the night before. Once the tourists left, the locals kicked off axe and knife throwing contests. I'd been a reenactor in my youth and gave a respectable showing, but the regulars showed me up. Still, it was enough to gain us some new friends. One fellow had an ATL, and I cleaned his clock at the target range. I always did like that weapon. I did pretty well at the fire starting competition too. It had been 30 years, but you don't forget that stuff. We sat around swapping stories and getting nicely buzzed on rum drinks all day long. Thank God somebody got us into a taxi to get back aboard that night. We were pretty well and truly wrecked. Monday morning we woke up. Well, it was about noon. I was dehydrated and had one hell of a hangover. I downed 3 aspirin and held a gallon jug to the mouths of my beautiful bedmates. I knew that they'd thank me later. Eventually I had to piss, so I drank my fill once again. I figured that 3 cycles would do me right. We headed for Aruba. It took a couple days of solid motoring and navigation to get there. The ladies wanted to go see the sights, and I got dragooned. When we stopped to visit the donkey preserve, I laid down in the shade of a tree and took a nap. I awoke to find myself surrounded by donkeys. They'd broken out of their pen to sleep with me. They had laid their heads on my chest, belly, groin, and legs. Tourists were snapping pictures fit to beat the band. I petted a couple that slept against my chest and went back to sleep. I suppose that I woke up because it got a little colder. When I rose and stretched, the little donkeys butted me for head scratches. I left $500 with the place to feed them day-old buns from the nearby village. Fresh would bind up their guts, but day-olds would do fine. $500 worth would feed them for almost 2 years. The ladies had a giggle, calling me a leader of donkeys. I replied that being a governor was exactly that. Only the brays were different. We set out for another port of call. Rather than show them what I regarded as the commercialized disappointment that Puerto Rico had become, I rotated my compass some 45 degrees south and set out for Aruba. Either direction would take us approximately 600 miles to reach our next port. The summer seas were kind to us. We tied up at the Aruba Port Authority to go through customs and obtain tourist visas. I hauled out my black Grenadian diplomatic passport to try and expedite matters. That was a mistake. Suddenly there were politicians, police, and, believe it or not, a brass band. The law of unintended consequences struck again. The ladies were impressed, but I just shook my head. I had to convince the lieutenant governor that I was there as a tourist, not as a representative of the people. He smiled, shook my hand, and still insisted on the red carpet treatment. The fancy that got cleaned within an inch of its existence while we were put up at the DV Aruba all-inclusive beach resort for the duration. We stayed about a week. I can only mellow out so much before I begin to froth at the mouth and spin. I convinced the ladies to dress up in something other than the scandalous beach wear that they'd adopted as their daily dress. We hit the Erebus as a self-guided tour of the western island. There were more natives than tourists using it. I heard English, Dutch, French, Spanish, and some sort of patois. That made me comfortable as I could speak 3 out of the 5. Most of the natives were dark. I was thankful that all 3 of us had developed deep tans so that we didn't look like quartz crystals in a coal pile. The ladies found some slinky skirts called sarongs that they were very happy with. Soon it was time to leave. We were fueled up and ready to go. The lieutenant governor was scandalized that all we had for defenses were rifles and shotguns. After a long discourse on choices and the reduction of our options if we had visible defenses, he reluctantly bent to my decision not to carry heavy. We motored east. I made way for Grenada, some 500 miles across northern South America. We ran into some tidal influences due to our proximity to the coast. Nevertheless, our piloting stack kept us on course. I had a lot of time to think during that cruise. I reviewed our one and only response to a threat. I had seen several nice laser range finders available as a handheld monocle. I wondered if such a thing was available to add to my helmet-mounted low-light scope. That would give me the targeting information I needed when I wanted it. I could see that if a combat radio were added, it would be quite valuable in virtually any low-light team response. If anyone had such a thing, it was quite probable that the French Foreign Legion had it and used it. I was quite certain that I still was gold in the FFL. I'd pursue such a thing once we reached the island. Perhaps. We were paced by porpoises and watched them surf our wake. Such freedoms seem magical when they are beyond your scope. Witness our fascination with seabirds that hover in the air without a wing stroke. They surf the very breezes. When we docked in Grenada and I presented my passport, you'd have thought that the Pope had come to call. I was damn tempted to weigh anchor and forget about the whole thing, but the ladies were having a blast. So, I kept my pie hole shut. Next time I'd flaunt a big cigar, wear Groucho glasses, and a straw hat. I breathed a sigh of relief when the furor died down. It took a week and a half. It had only been a few years since I'd been on the island. Not much had changed, but the economy had grown. I figured that they were now at the point that what worked in Jamaica would work in Grenada. I made an appointment with the governor to discuss my scheme. Why not go to the top when you've got the pull? The ladies asked to accompany me. What? Was I going to say no? I had to live with them in close quarters. I didn't fancy sleeping in the life raft, either. I snickered when I saw my political successor. He looked like hell. You're not delegating enough, man. You look like you just went 5 rounds with a mako shark. How the hell did you do it? I've got 7 guys stepping and fetching for all they're worth, and they're not worth much. I took pity on him. Here's the secret. Ignore everybody else and do the job the best you can. You'll sleep better knowing that you're not bargaining away your integrity. Once you get your self-respect back, you'll be able to look anyone and everyone in the eye and tell them to go to hell. Otherwise, they'll nickel and dime you to death. Don't ask, command. If they don't cooperate, replace them. Do that a couple times, and I'll bet your troublemakers will fall right in line. I'd bet good money that what I witnessed was the first smile on his face in many months. I appreciate your words and what they represent. I promise to put it into action as soon as I can. Now, what can I do for you? Got a tourism minister? A development minister? I'd like to tell you what I started in Jamaica. The six of us had a working lunch as I planned out the combination open-air market and picnic system. There was still plenty of unpopulated nice land between beaches and roads. I promised $50 million for the sanitary facilities, pole buildings, electrical and water runs, paving, and for importing the big barbecue grills. They'd need to nationalize some land and beaches for the space. They agreed to declare a national resettlement holiday, which would declare the sites open. 3 sites were designated. Lizzie got them to agree almost single-handedly with her camera full of pictures of the 2 Jamaican sites we'd visited. The beautiful areas with cleared understories and paved lanes looked superb, and the shots of people laughing, eating, dancing, and playing cards said a lot. I described the conversations that I'd had with the gendarmes about civil disturbances being weighed down since the picnics were organized. They didn't miss the pictures of tourists spending money, either. You can sell only so much nutmeg. The country desperately needed disposable income. The governor's communications office leaked the whole thing. People got a little weird about it, then came right on board. I rented a car and took a trip around the island. There were a lot less fishermen than I thought there should be. I talked it over with the Port Authority. The island was healthy, but still quite cash poor. People couldn't afford fishing boats, engines, or fuel. It was a nasty cycle. I paid a French construction firm to rebuild the cruise ship pier to 50 feet wide and rerun the facilities, such as pumps, water lines, electrical lines, and pump-out facilities. That would help with the tourism. Next, I had a fishermen's credit union established. I capitalized it with $70 million. Then I bought 40 small commercial fishing boats from all over the Caribbean, had them rebuilt and reconditioned at the yards in Puerto Cabela, and raffled the damn things off. The boats in total cost me about $30 million. I had to start more industries to use what the fishermen took in. Several plants were built, along with a restaurant-grade fish market that also had a facility that I'd read about from Malaysia and the Philippines. You bought what you wanted: seafood, vegetables, other meats, whatever, and paid some guys with gas-fired woks to make your dinner. Christ, did that catch on. Before long, some vendors were having cold water fish, shellfish, and lobster shipped in. I'd never heard of something taking off like that before. Oh, the other plants were canning fish for the international markets, especially Asian markets, making steam bone meal fertilizer, and processing the offal for even more fertilizer. These were small operations compared to some, and we had small fishing operations, so we didn't strip the fishing beds. Just in case, I warned the governor to pass on that in this case. Being too successful would collapse the market. Not could, would. Well, winter was coming on, and Em was due back home. Rather than motor my way all the way back across the Caribbean to drop off one passenger, I bought her a first-class ticket home. Our last night as a group was subdued. Well, Emma, do you think you've got your head on straighter than when we started this thing? She smiled. There's no question of that. Oh, I've had a lot of fun, but I've learned a lot too. While you were working with the governor to boost the economy, Lizzie and I went to the library to read some of the archives. Your journals from the Reconstruction make for fascinating reading. It makes me realize how much one person can accomplish. I still have no idea where your motivation came from. You never stopped. You still haven't. I can't understand. I looked out the ship's broad windows to the green trees above the white sandy beach. I can barely put it into words. I saw the island languishing, the people dead where they lay. It felt like a dying child to me. I had no choice, I had to act. I had the money, and I'd recently read about the French Foreign Legion rendering humanitarian aid in time of catastrophe. All that money in the bank wasn't doing me a damned bit of good. What was I going to do with it? Swim in it like Scrooge McDuck? So you single-handedly ramrod one of the biggest humanitarian aid projects in modern history. The typhoon, earthquake, and tsunami recovery efforts were all massively parallel team efforts. You instigated, controlled, and masterminded the whole thing yourself. Then they voted you out. I smiled. You bet. I was getting burned out. It was the best thing that could have happened. Did you see that poor guy that's the governor now? He looks like 10 miles of bad road. He's only been doing it 4 years or so. I did it for nearly 10 and lived to tell the tale. Screw it, I'm out of there. Lizzie nodded. We learned that as a family. Burnout at the upper levels of management is a notorious man killer. Team leadership doesn't work. Only divestiture and limitation of scope works. Yep, that's what happened to Uncle Eugene. He dropped the whole Stoner Arms mess into the laps of his constantly infighting board of directors and told them to go screw themselves. He was a good man, and I miss him. I sighed and looked out again, noticing that the sun was almost down and the bright green was hardly visible anymore. Enough of this. What do you say to burgers on the grill? I'm pretty sure we have a few pounds of good ground beef left in the deep freeze. Lizzie and I stood there watching the jet take off with them on board. Well, there she goes. I hope she's better for it. Lizzie said. She was happy just being with us. If we'd asked, she'd have agreed to be a second wife in a New York minute. I looked over at her, surprised. Oh, and And what about you? Want to be my first wife? She smiled and slid her arm around mine. Why, Curtis, I thought you'd never ask. That was 4 years ago. The Imagine that comes out of dry dock every year for a cruise up the islands, then goes back into storage. Lizzie and I tweaked the hacienda here and there, but we're pretty happy with it. My idea of having a decorator furnish the place with a theme of blonde mission oak paid off, as she was pretty happy with things the way they lay. The wedding was a big bash, with everyone who was anyone for over 100 miles attending. The Legion honored us as we proceeded down the aisle with a saber arch salute. That capped off the day for me. For Liz, it was meeting the French ambassador. She'd been educated on the continent and rattled away like a Parisienne in French, captivating the man. When we sat down together, I sighed. A husband of a beautiful woman is a thing of terrors and night sweats. Now, I am certain I have a rival for your charms. She held my hand and smiled. Your worries are baseless, dear. He's but a chair warmer. You have built a nation. I've done some good things and some evil things since coming back to the island. I've underwritten 2 refrigerated warehouses, climate-controlled warehouses, rather, several bakeries, what turned out to be a very popular bookstore, and a music club/bar. I also introduced legislation to restrict the size of retail establishments. The new governor couldn't wrap his head around the reason why I'd do such a thing. I sent both him and his secretary for commercial development on a 1-week luxury vacation to San Juan, Puerto Rico, with the understanding that they must take a guided tour of the city. They returned quite subdued. The legislation passed. Granada would never again have a mall or a single store larger than a supermarket. Home Depot and Lowe's would never get a toehold on the island. Simple lumberyards were written in as an exception with a documented list of approved services. A few commercial-only resources along the same lines were approved, in the same manner and with similar restrictions. We kept our beloved open-air markets and the fish market, though. The immigration quotas were tied directly to the availability of fresh water. Lizzie took a trip back north to sell her restaurants. I missed her while she was gone, and told her so when she returned. We had bought a little runabout with a 5.7-liter Merc inboard. It got us back and forth to town. There was a town roughly every 2 miles down the coast, but the capital, St. George's, was about 10 miles away. We were sitting in a coffee house in Victoria, having pastries and listening to the local gossip. It seemed that someone had spotted jungle cats back in the woods, and people were terrified to go out at night. I laughed, which brought me some unpleasant attention until I told my story about Rex, my savanna cat that looked like a giant bobcat that had disappeared into the jungle while I was fighting to get the economy running. I looked at Liz, and she scowled and looked back. She had no idea what I was up to. Let's grab a couple of jackets and take a walk. It gets cooler after dark. We were waiting for the doors of the coffee shop to open at 6. We had 2 cats with us. They seemed as intelligent as Rex. I asked the shop owner for a couple pounds of ham and a couple bowls of water for $20. He agreed. Hell, he was making more money than usual from people coming in to see the cats. They polished off the meat and drank their fill. I let them outside to do the natural thing, then let them back inside. These are your terrifying jungle cats. Rex found a mommy somewhere, and they started pumping out kittens. At 4 to 8 per litter, averaging 6 per litter, 6 years to work with and 2 years to maturation. That gives us, 636 cats, if none died. 50% of each litter was female. They all caught, and there was enough food for all of them. There's no way this island could feed that many cats, so let's just say you've got one hell of a lot of savanna cat crossbreeds out there. Now just what Rex got it on with as a mate, who knows? By the looks of these 2, it could have been a panther for all I know. They're darker than Rex was, and if my memory is correct, a bit less muscular, more lean. Any way you look at it, there won't be a rat or a snake on this island for a long, long time. I suggest that some of you go take a little walk with a good attitude, and maybe you'll come home with one of the best friends your kids will ever have. As soon as I got home, I put in an order for 500 pounds of oil dry and 1,000 pounds of Science Diet Big Cat formula. Since we lived in what was essentially a big concrete-lined hole in the ground surrounded by artificial caves, I thought about how to give the cats access in and out without our intervention. I had a carpenter put in a curved ramp 1 foot wide with a grade of 1 foot up for every 2 feet of travel, then waterproof the hell out of it. Next, a mason applied a rather thick sandy topcoat to the surface. When it dried, it made a racetrack for the cats. One morning, I went to bed with 2 cats. I woke up with 8 on the patio. I shrugged and got more cat chow out. I never thought that I'd end up as a zookeeper. Lizzie came down with a bad case of pregnant. She'd seemed a bit tired the past few days. When she sat down on a lounger for some sun, the cats took one sniff and covered her in purring kitty flesh. I just watched. What the hell brought this on? She replied, bemused, I have no goddamned idea. You're run down for no real reason. The cats sniffed you and went nuts. Honey? When was your last period? She started counting, stopped, and did it again. She slowly said, I'm late. I'm never late. I grinned like only a male can. Guess what? There is something that can make you late. Betcha you're preggers. Knocked up. Bun in the oven. All right, damn it. I get the idea. She couldn't help but grin. Betcha money that if we let him know she damned well swim down here to help out. She laughed loud and long. No bet. I sat there thinking, gonna call your folks? She shook her head. Not until a doctor agrees. I don't need a crack team of doctors down here on my mom's dime making my life hell. We'll let them know when it's delivery time so that they can be around for the entertainment value. I'll need it by then. Is it true that pregnant women are extra amorous? I don't know. Let's go find out. There are good decisions you make in life and bad decisions. Some are both. Opening that can of worms turned out to be a decision I'd ponder for years. The farm wives descended with baby gear of all kinds. The spare bedroom closest to ours got repainted and turned into a nursery. One of the women tried to shoo the cats out of the house and damn near got her, but handed to her. That didn't happen again. Mama got a quart of fresh whole milk to drink every day, and by damn they stood around and watched to make sure she did. I got her into a baby doctor within the week. When I described what the cats did, he grinned like a fool. No need for any other tests, but I'll do M just to stay legal. The cats say you're pregnant, then you're pregnant. We got stinky prenatal vitamins, a no-no list, and a yes list from the doc, probably the same one he'd been handing out since the 70s. A couple months down the line, her baby bump really showed. I asked her, say, would you like some of my steak and kidney pie? Her eyes positively glowed. I sent away to the mainland for 10 pounds of fresh veal kidneys, 10 pounds of fresh veal liver, 20 pounds of stripped beef tenderloin, and 50 pounds of beef scrap and bones, stripped of fat, all on ice. Next day delivery. I bought heads of celery, bunches of onions, bunches of carrots, and handfuls of turnip. All of that got roasted on a big grill along with the beef scrap until the bones were browning. It all got dumped into 4 big kettles with some tomato paste and filled with cold water. It all came up, slowly, to a simmer. I separated out for handfuls of bay leaf, peppercorns, carrot top, parsley root, and celeriac in 4 cheesecloth bags, and plunked one into each pot. When scum rose to the surface, it was skimmed off and discarded. After 10 hours, the stock was strained and put into a big white food-grade polyethylene tub in the walk-in to chill. The next morning, it was cold enough for the fat to have risen to the top and congealed. I removed it and put the stock back on the heat in freshly cleaned stock pots. I reduced it slowly until it all fit in one pot, then reduced it by a quarter once again. I had about 15 gallons of stock. I tasted it, poured in a half bottle of good red wine, and reduced all to half its volume, or about 7 gallons. I tasted it once more, then gave Lizzie some soaked into a piece of crusty bread. She pronounced it yum. Good enough for me. A pound of sliced, rinsed liver, a pound of sliced, rinsed kidney, and 2 pounds of tenderloin went into a gallon of stock with 2 big sweet onions, some carrot, and some celery. That cooked until I could mash all the meat with the back of a fork. I'd made crusts by then. I knew I had a good thing with 6-inch meat pies. I had the volume versus crust worked out just right. I cooked up 10, 8 for the farmer, and 2 for us. They were thickened with a cornstarch slurry. The cats had been so patient, I made up another gallon for them, and when it was ready, I poured it over their chow. I think it was a hit. It disappeared like the girl in a Las Vegas magic act. I made up the rest of the meats into more pies that I froze and preserved in cling wrap. The momentous day arrived. I was chivied out the door while the doctor arrived by helicopter with 2 nurses and a big rolling cart. I wasn't too worried because the doc didn't demand that the whole circus be airlifted to the hospital, but I wanted to keep an eye on things, so I took my time getting down the cat ramp to the inner courtyard. Nobody had thought to lock the doors, so I cracked one closest to the bedroom and sat down with a couple of cats to pet. No, I could have peered into the window and scared the living crap out of myself, but I didn't. I like to sleep at night. Eventually I heard, ready to catch? Yep. Push. Oh, agia. By that time I'd about shit my pants. Corn. When did I eat corn? Oh, that's my teeth. I heard the wail of a newborn infant and ghosted into our bedroom in between all the women attending. The doctor was sitting in a chair, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. How is she? Fine. The placenta will come on its own, but the job isn't finished until it does. There could be post-birth bleeding that we have to watch for. I don't see anything to worry about. The baby? Fine. Apgar of 9. Little girl. Tough as nails. She tried to bite me. He grinned. I would too after what she put me through. I sat down next to him. The next thing I knew, I was handed a blanket-wrapped little thing with an expression I'd last seen on pictures of Churchill. I wasn't going to tell Lizzie that. It would be a secret I'd take to my grave. I held her to my chest, where she gurgled a bit, then started snoring. Good sign, I guessed. I just sat there, bemused until she woke up, and boy was she cranky. It was time for her meal, and don't get in her way. After a spectacularly belligerent first 6 months, things settled into a dull roar. She liked the cats, and the cats tolerated her. I was sure glad they were a short-tailed breed. Once she learned to scoot, we'd often find her on the patio, playing in the grass. Once I found her 8 feet up the cat ramp. That was enough of that, my dear. A 1-foot fence went up at the bottom. The cats could navigate it perfectly well, but her, not so much. She didn't like that. No, sir, not at all. She pulled the nails out of one side. I had to put it back in place with screws. Big screws. I put in a wading pool with a pump for a little current, and it was all happy, happy, joy, joy again. When I saw her squat down and use the cat box, though, I had my doubts about who was raising who, us or the cats. I think my question was answered when I heard secondhand that she'd crept up behind one of the women helping us keep the place clean and let loose an ear-splitting howl that very closely resembled a bobcat in a very bad mood. We lost a housekeeper that day. I threatened to put a shock collar on her, but Lizzie wouldn't listen. Still, when I picked her up and held her, she quieted right down. I started reading to her every day. I noticed that after a month or so, she was tracking what I was reading. I didn't think a 3-year-old could do that. At 4, she was using the toilet, using tableware, drinking from a cup, and tying her shoes. If she didn't like someone, she'd walk right up and kick him in the shins. I don't mean just a little love tap, either. When she was 5, her favorite phrase was, "Why are you so stupid? How do you come back from that?" When she tried it with me, I replied, "Because someone has to be dumb enough to put up with you." Then I held her upside down by both ankles and shook her until she got the hiccups. For a while after that, she stood off and threw stones at me. After I caught a couple and made her swallow them, she stopped. I took her out camping overnight. We each had a shovel, a potato, some salt, a canteen of water, a tarp, a small knife, and some cord. Oh, and matches. From then on, I never knew where the hell she'd be. She learned on her own how to make a net and learned how to throw it. I took her to a tidal pool and used a stick to show her why she should never, ever go near the seashore without shoes on. There were some spiny things out there with neurotoxins as well as innocent-looking jellyfish that weren't quite dead yet. I got her to agree to carry the GPS locator that I bought for her. She hugged me tight after I told her why I wanted her to carry it. I was thinking about getting her some professional tutoring in stick fighting and using a stone sling, or even some knife fighting. She certainly had the speed and bloodthirstiness for it. Lizzie curled up to me in bed one evening. "Honey, I'm scared." "Scared? Why?" "I'm pregnant again." After a long while. Honey? I petted her and held her. "There's only one way we can approach this." "What's that?" "It's a gift." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.